And so last week's episode, we took a little trip down memory lane and sort of recounted our experience and memories of the entire Guardians franchise within the context of the MCU. We talked about the first two movies, of course, as well as all of their other appearances in subsequent films such as Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, so on and so forth. So we don't need to necessarily litigate that same information. But what we didn't really talk about was just the long and arduous road that it took to get to the release of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. The last time we got a Guardians film, a solo film with that team, was all the way back in 2017. So it's been 6 years since we've gotten a Guardians movie. And a lot has happened in those 6 years. There have been so many developments, so many things have changed, especially within the own storytelling of the MCU. But first, I just wanted to quickly give a top line Cliff Notes sort of recap of everything that occurred. So Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 comes out in 2017. It's followed up by two of the biggest films of all time in Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, which concluded the Infinity Saga successfully and wrapped up that 10 years worth of storytelling that Marvel set out to do. But in the interim, between that time of those films being released, James Gunn was fired by Disney and Marvel Studios because some old tweets had resurfaced from his past, some very inappropriate tweets of joking things that he had said. Somebody dug him up, and basically it cost him his job. It cost him the job of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. That caused a lot of uproar, a lot of conversation around just the practice of getting rid of filmmakers based off of things that happened in the past, especially something that he had already apologized for. After a few months, Disney eventually rehired James Gunn, but while he was fired, the guy went across town to DC and Warner Brothers and got a different job. He started to work with their team, created the Suicide Squad movie, so he was already on board to do that. So by the time Disney got him back, he had already made that commitment. So he had to pause work on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, go film the Suicide Squad, and also write a new television show in Peacemaker. That comes out, and then he could continue his work on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. In addition to all of that stuff specifically with him, the MCU has been in a bit of a rocky place as of late, which we've talked about numerous times on this podcast. After Avengers Endgame, with Phase 4, things have not been exactly smooth sailing for the MCU. They've released a ton of TV shows, causing, I think, a bit of oversaturation in their product. Also, many of these things that they've released on the TV side and even on the movie side have not been the most well-received projects. It's definitely not the same MCU of yesteryear when they were releasing project after project that everybody pretty much loved. In addition to that, there's been a ton of stuff behind the scenes that has caused controversy, exec shakeups within Disney and also Marvel Studios in general, things with actors such as Jonathan Majors, which we recently just talked about. There's just a ton of stuff going on right now with Marvel. They are not in the place that they used to be, but I just want to sort of revisit, what's your temperature on Marvel Studios and where the MCU is right now? I know we've talked about it several times, but after Quantumania, which was going to kick off Phase 5, that sort of felt like it could have been a refresher, maybe a clean slate to start over. It didn't quite turn out to be that way. It went on to be a poorly received movie and also the lowest grossing Ant-Man movie of the franchise. And so between that time and everything that has occurred all the way up until the release of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 now, just what's your temperature on the MCU and how are you feeling about things where they are right now?
And there's so much, I think, going down in the MCU right now. And a lot of it, to be honest, is, I think, unluckiness, right? Is part of it. I don't want to put any and everything on Marvel themselves and be like, yes, it's all their fault. Because some stuff is just the universe, bro. Jonathan Major stuff, that's the universe. Like, I don't, you know what I'm saying? Like, they couldn't have known what we know now, about that individual. That's just unfortunate. But there is, I think, just so many outlying factors in things that make the MCU just in a weird spot. It really is. I don't even know if you can call it bittersweet, but it's definitely not the sweetest taste that I think we all wish that we had at this time. And you pretty much talked about all of them, but a big one for a lot of people, I think, is the oversaturation of what the MCU is. Not even just the MCU, right? It is superhero fatigue in general that people have. And the only thing I'll say about that is there are still superhero films performing. You know what I'm saying? There's some kind of appetite still for superhero films, but we see, I think, the MCU get criticized a little bit more for that oversaturation because their tone, I think, is so stagnant, right? Versus the revelation that is the movie of the Batman, right? Matt Reeves, the Batman, which is like that feels very different from anything in the Zack Snyder verse of things. And I think people now have seen that, right? People have seen Spider-Verse be successful. And I think there's like a weird, I think, appetite just for newness. And MCU, I think, is attempting some of those things in terms of newness, but I think it's hard to keep your brand while moving in the direction of a, not necessarily a new brand, but trying to venture out while keeping the same things that everyone loved you for in the first place. It's just a difficult thing to balance. And I think the MCU is going through that very thing right now. And so it's a very hard, it's a very hard task. It really is. And I'm not here to get mad at them for it or praise them for what they're doing, but I think I understand the position they're in. And it just sucks, I think, that they have to be put in that position, but it's the nature of things, is what it feels like, man. But between that and all of the craziness that went down, man, the MCU, I think, is in a state of, I think what a lot of us hope is rebirth. Like you said, Ant-Man comes out. It is not the rebirth we think it's going to be. I mean, myself included, I thought Quantumania was going to be something ridiculous, right? I thought Quantumania was the way I felt about Guardians, the original Guardians back in 2014. I was like, man, I hope I feel like this way about Quantumania. I needed that same feeling. And I didn't necessarily get that same feeling, but I did get the feeling of trying new things. I did get the feeling of this is uncharted territory. MCU is doing something it's never done before. That's the feeling I got from that movie. And that's the biggest pros I took from that movie. Like, damn, they were taking swings with this film. And so for me, the state of the MCU is that they're taking swings, and I think they're trying to, recontextualize what the MCU means to people. Because I do think there's, to a certain extent, the MCU doesn't want people to know them as what people started disliking them for, right? All the quippy things, all the way movies look, right? We talk about visual effects a lot. And for us particularly, we talk about color grading a lot too, right? I think they don't want to be known for some of that stuff no more. I think they are giving new directors chances. They are giving other people chances. And that's where I think the state of the MCU is, in that weird middle ground where they're just trying to find, I think, part of a new identity while maintaining some of the characteristics of that old one. And so I don't know what that looks like for them in the future. We'll have to see. They got a lot of groundwork to do. But I'm not. But I think they're beginning to do some of those things, right? They are slowing down on their projects. Of course, there's a writer strike now. Now they're forced to slow down on some of those things, right? But that's okay. I'm okay with that. If that means they get more time to sit on. I think the biggest one affected, right, is Blade, right? If they get time to sit on Blade and figure that out and make that as complete project as possible, I'm okay with that. But I very much feel like the MCU is they're just trying to figure it out, and that's where they are right now. They're not the hammer home in every movie like they used to be, and now I think they're scrambling, of course, with all these crazy outside forces too, but they're scrambling to try to, I think, get back to where they were, but with a new lens.
Yeah, at one time, Marvel Studios, the MCU, was the most reliable brand in Hollywood. You just knew that a film would come out, it was going to be uber successful, not only financially, but critically as well. And to your point about circumstances out of their control, we be remiss not to mention the COVID-19 pandemic, which just sat everybody down. And it also got people out of the habit of going to the movies. People just stayed home and watched stuff. And so when you try to reintroduce the idea of going to the movies for most of the entertainment, theatrical going audience, they're probably going to be a little bit resistant to that idea, especially considering how much streaming has become a factor. And so we saw in the first initial films that were coming out, things were a little slow out of the gate. Your Black Widows, Shang-Chi, Eternals, people weren't running out of the house to go watch those movies. You have a No Way Home, which was a big epic crossover multi-generational event. Everybody had to see it as soon as possible. And then since the release of that movie, it's been, somewhat of a different type of scale depending on what project you talk about. I think Doctor Strange had a lot of the multiverse spoiler territory where people needed to see it as soon as possible. Thor Love and Thunder, that baked in audience of just being Thor fans wanted to go see it, but then they saw that it wasn't exactly what they wanted, and so they kind of retreated. Black Panther was another sort of cultural moment, obviously in recognition of Chadwick Boseman, but still had a bit of a challenge to overcome just all the circumstances around that movie as well. And then Quantumania is just like, well, what's going on here, really? Like, this actually kind of feels like it might be a lot worse than what we think it is. But I do want to say that some of these things are in their control and that they have been directly responsible for some of these downfalls that they face and these challenges. And I think about in the house of Disney, within the offices of Marvel Studios, with the exec shakeups and things that have happened behind the scenes. Bob Chapek comes in, takes over, and mandates this extreme content rollout for the past few years, mandates essentially that we need multiple shows hitting Disney Plus every single year because Disney Plus is the priority. I don't really care about theatrical movie going. I want subscribers. So we need to give them as many new shows as possible. And all of a sudden, we have 6 Marvel shows coming out in 1 year. And it's like, do we really need this much after we just went from just 3 movies a year, maybe 4 at most, to now we're getting something almost every month. And at the same time, the quality is not also being able to sustain itself across that many projects because you're getting a team in a studio that's probably spread thin. And then as a result of that, you get an entire VFX industry trying to create and elevate a genre which is so reliant on VFX, and they're getting burnt out. There's not enough artists to even produce the massive amount of work, right? And so I think that this pipeline just got severely damaged over the past 2 to 3 years. Like, it's been as strained as it's probably ever been, and Marvel, being sort of the biggest proprietor of VFX, has only sort of burnt out probably their biggest resource, and that is visual effects. That is such a huge component to all of their storytelling. And so you get a lot of conversations around that. And then, of course, just more interior things that have happened most recently with Victoria Alonso, which was in all likelihood probably outside of the purview of Marvel Studios. I'm sure that got elevated up until, the top offices of Disney, and that became a bigger issue at play because she's one of their top executives. And that just doesn't look great in the midst of everything that's already happening. Not to mention the movies have probably just not been home runs. That's the reality of it. I think we have to be candid that some of the films are really good, and then a fair share of these are like, okay, that was cool. I don't know if I really needed that. I don't know if it moved the needle, especially on the TV side. We probably want to try that again, or we probably want to explore something else. And so there's definitely some responsibility that has to be had on the part of Marvel Studios. But by and large, I think that this just speaks to a larger industry trend that we often see. Nothing lasts forever. No popular trend, no studio, no franchise is always hot all the time. Like, everything has some sort of expiration date. These movies will continue to make money and they'll still be profitable. And I'm not calling for the end of the MCU. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm just saying that if we are indeed out of the quote unquote golden age, that doesn't mean that the studio and that the films that they put out won't continue to still be successful to some degree. There's always going to be fans here to go watch this stuff. There's always going to be an audience that comes back to it over and over again. Like, they're about to release the 7th Transformers movie. It won't do what the height of the franchise used to do, but it'll probably do well. It'll probably have respectable business. They'll continue to make those movies as well. And so I'll just say that as like sort of a preface to where things might be headed, but we still have to see just a lot of the future and the developments and how things shake out with just the rest of the stories that they anticipate telling. I do also just want to point out that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, as I alluded to with James Gunn, him being the creative visionary behind this, for a long time, this project was without him. He was fired from the studio and went months without a job until he landed over at Warner Brothers in DC. But people weren't having that, and the cast wasn't having it. They stood in solidarity with him. They signed a note, basically saying that we want to finish this vision with our director. We don't want to do this movie without James Gunn involved. There was also, of course, a lot of online petitions which gained huge traction. But I think it's interesting that, hypothetically, if James Gunn never got fired, this movie would have come out probably 2 years ago. It probably would have been one of the first projects after Endgame. And I just wonder, and we'll never know, but I just wonder if this film had come out when it was originally intended to do so, could we be having an entirely different conversation right now? Obviously, as you said, there are many outside factors that we just could not have predicted, but let's just say Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 kicks off Phase 4. Does that create momentum? Does that create just a different type of temperature and energy towards the MCU, knowing that we started off in a really strong place, as opposed to where we did start off? It was just like, I don't even know what's going on now. We're making a Black Widow movie and I thought she died. We're introducing new characters that I don't really know. What's Eternals? What is this even about? Do you think that could have just influenced the overall direction and how people feel about this franchise?
Oh, without a doubt, man. Especially, again, just the energy that, good or bad, however you feel about James Gunn, he brings a different energy to movies. There's no way you watch, outside of the MCU, a movie like Suicide Squad and don't like tell me you felt like you've seen a movie like that before, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Unless it was written and directed by James Gunn himself. And I think that energy definitely would have felt different. Guardians would have been a sequel. It wouldn't have been Black Widow, like you just said, which is a whatever you want to call that movie, a prequel, sequel. I really have no idea how to contextualize that movie half the time. But it's just one of those things, I think, where it definitely would have at least changed something. Who knows if it would have been for the better? Who knows if this movie would have turned out the way it turned out if it did come out that in that time, right? But again, I think the important part again is just trusting in somebody like a James Gunn to like, okay, this is the beginning of the phase, right? And I think that definitely makes for something different, especially given how well received at least Guardians 1 and 2 were. You know what I mean? There hadn't been a Black Widow movie. That we didn't know what that movie was going to be like. There had been Guardians movies. Imagine if we had just gotten, I think, that at least a small sense of comfortability, right? Knowing what James Gunn has produced in the past and knowing what the Guardians, those characters, have brought to the MCU, as we spoke about their influence in the MCU in our last one of our previous episodes, right? So definitely would have made a difference. I'm curious to what it would look like now in like some kind of, you know, different reality, but it is what it is. But I think that is a really cool thought and idea to kind of sit on.
Yeah, I mean, entirely from the get-go, you just would have had a different energy and a different sense of let's kickstart this stuff with paying tribute and homage to previous characters that carried our franchise for the better part of 10 years. And I think that could have been a good way to just get us back within the context of the MCU, especially post Endgame, where we were sort of searching for direction, and maybe that direction would have lied within characters that were already familiar, as opposed to many of these new stories. And the MCU will only continue to grow and evolve by introducing new characters and new stories. So I'm not knocking that at all, but I do think that there is a certain power to having the familiar, especially after losing so many of the familiar faces that we had grown accustomed to, like your Robert Downey Jr.'s, Chris Evans, even Scarlett Johansson after a certain amount of time. And so I do wonder what that would have looked like, but we will never know. I do want to just quickly talk about the box office returns of this film before we transition into our official review. We do have some official numbers now from the opening weekend of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And I bring this up again because a lot of the financial receipts of these movies is sort of a part of the conversation in terms of how people perceive the MCU and the success of the MCU. But so far, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 had a domestic opening a domestic opening weekend of $118 million, which is slightly under expectations. They were expecting 120, but it's almost right there. It gained about another 165 million from international territories. So the global total was $282 million worldwide. So far, it has the second biggest domestic opening weekend of the year behind the Super Mario Brothers movie, which opened at 146. Some recent MCU releases, just for comparison, a year ago, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness had a massive opening weekend, $185 million in the 3-day weekend. Black Panther Wakanda Forever went on to make 181, Thor Love and Thunder 144, and most recently, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania over the 3-day weekend made 104 million, but then over the 4-day President's Day weekend went on to gross about $120 million. In comparison to the Guardians franchise, Volume 3 falls in the middle. Guardians 1 back in 2014 opened to $94 million domestically, and Guardians 2 back in 2017 actually opened to a massive $146 million domestically. So this isn't opening as big as its predecessor, but it is opening bigger than the original film, and it's about on par with recent MCU releases. It's just above Ant-Man, slightly below some other releases like Thor Love and Thunder. I guess I bring this all up to say that I don't even know how much this matters anymore, just because Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania had its biggest franchise opening weekend, but then it went on to be the lowest grossing of the franchise. It fell off of a cliff in its second weekend. It had like a 69% drop, so it did not have any legs at all. But conversely, you look at a movie like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, had a massive opening weekend, had a massive global total as well, made nearly $1 billion worldwide. So it's just hard to tell. I guess what I'll ask you is, beyond just the numbers and the predictions and how much it'll make, if this movie does indeed end up being a hit, let's just hypothetically say it is somewhere between the second and the highest grossing Guardians movie of all time. Do you think that can steady the ship for Marvel? Do you think that provides an air of confidence in everything that's happening right now around the rocky conversation as it pertains to their franchise? Or is this more of a temporary triumph amongst a sea of uncertainty and a sea of just doubt that's cast upon where the franchise is at the current moment?
Man, that's I think a hard thing that I think put my finger on completely, because of all the craziness in the box office. Like you said, Guardians comes in and almost in a lot of ways they're expecting it to perform better than Quantumania just because of anything, right? James Gunn, whether it's previous Guardians movies, whether it's, I think they're expecting, like you said, what was it, 120 they were expecting, right? And they kind of land that. But what is the legs for this movie? And it's so hard, right? I don't think this movie critically word of mouth is the same as Quantumania. Quantumania had some
Not at all. Not at all the
people were
same.
talking crazy about Quantumania. But I can imagine that meant a lot when it came to people going to see the film, especially second, third, fourth weekend going to see the film. And I feel like Guardians is not in that same boat. I'm not saying they didn't take swings with Guardians. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. But Quantumania definitely took those swings and ended up, I think, in a very weird place versus, I think Guardians is just a little more trusted. Simple as that. I think part of I think Doctor Strange is sitting like 955 million. If Doctor Strange got close to a bill, which I could have not predicted. Like, part of me is like, that's nuts. But there was comfortability in having a TV show before, right? It was like, oh, Wanda is in this thing. Oh, from WandaVision? Again, that was a whole nother phenomenon.
And No Way Home, too, coming off of that.
And No Way Home, right off the bat. It's like, man, okay, we think we have a stride. Eternals was, I don't know about Eternals, but No Way Home and in Love and No Way Home and Multiverse of Madness, there was a little too okay. Everyone's like, okay, this phase might be all right. But now we've gone into this, what I would call an up and down trend, right? It's like up, down, up, down. We literally went Love and Thunder, kind of a down. Wakanda Forever, that's a up. Wakanda Forever did decent. Quantumania, overall, is probably a down. Guardians of the Galaxy, okay. So now it's like the movie that's coming up next is the Marvels. What's interesting about Guardians of the Galaxy, it is a galactic adventure. The Marvels is also exactly that, a galactic adventure. I'm not sure, but I'm hoping that the success of this movie, hopefully it has long legs, says, okay, everyone goes, man, that was fun. I wouldn't mind doing that with some other characters, perhaps. Following also a TV show, a good TV show in Miss Marvel. Maybe there's something there. That is the hope. That is what I'm hoping. Maybe that's what Guardians helps do to maybe the rest of this phase. Hopefully it gives them that energy to continue on, because it is the end of the phase is way more grounded, right? Captain America, Thunderbolts, and Blade. You know what I mean? And that's like, that's on the ground. Hopefully, well, we don't know about Blade yet, but that's on the ground mostly. And so I just see it. Hopefully it does what it needs to do. Again, it's hard to tell because of everything around it, but I would just say I like the energy right now, and it's something we'll have to keep our eye on, man. It's so unpredictable. It could fall off like Quantumania, like you said. Everybody who wanted to see it could have just went to go see it already. That could have been, you know what I'm saying? It could be the weekend. We're like, well, we did it. But I have a feeling that's not the case, and I really hope that's not the case. But that's kind of the way I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, I hadn't realized until just putting together the show notes and research that this is the 10th Marvel movie to come out since Endgame, which when you think about it, it's like we've already gotten 10 of these things in a few years. That's really crazy. So there's a lot of data to start to go off of in terms of what the trend is looking like and how these things are performing. But when you look at all the movies together, it's like, what? Nothing really makes sense. Like some things, like, yes, that probably got elevated from a previous project that has carryover because it is a franchise, it is a familiar property. And then other things where it's like, well, how did this end up this way? And a lot of it is probably due to a poor critical and commercial reaction from fans who just didn't flat out like the project and whatever they put out there. And so it's tough to say. I do agree with you, though, ultimately, that the fan reaction and the critical reaction to this movie is nothing like Quantumania. Like people were digging in Quantumania really, really bad. Like people flat out just didn't like it. And I think that's the large reason as to why it performed the way that it did. I mean, and I don't like this, but I'll be on the subway and I hear people talking about, yeah, man, I looked at that Rotten Tomato score for Quantumania. I ain't seeing it. I'm just gonna wait till it come out on Disney Plus. And I hate that type of thinking, but that's just that's where we are right now. People use that data to inform the decisions that they make. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, it's at like a 80 something percent on Rotten Tomatoes critically. It has a 95 or 96% fan reaction score. People love this movie. Everybody is unanimously saying like this is a really great time at the movies. I highly doubt that it's going to take the type of drop next week that Quantumania did in its second week. In fact, I think that this movie is going to leg out pretty successfully across the next month. Fast and Furious is going to put a little bit of a dent into it. The Little Mermaid comes out at the end of the month, but this feels like the type of movie, because it is the final chapter for these particular characters. It feels like the type of movie that people will go back to see again and again, just to really live in that moment and that experience of saying goodbye to this team of the Guardians, because they just want to make sure that they absorb all of the emotions, all of the stuff that's incorporated throughout the film. And so I think it's going to be really successful. I think it'll do well. Will it hit $1 billion? I don't know. It's just really hard to tell in this climate. But that, again, is not necessarily the mark that it needs to hit to be successful. No Guardians film has done so up until this point, but we look back on those other two films like, yeah, they did really, really well. Like, one, overperformed, two, outgrossed the first one. Those are big wins. And so I think that they can find a big win here. The bigger question is, like, does it steady the ship of just all the concerns that we have? I don't know if I'm ready to go that far. Like, one win is great, but we've had like some wins here and there along the way. You pointed out a number of them, shows like WandaVision or a movie like No Way Home. Like, those are wins, but there has to be a trend and there has to be momentum. Like, we have to see repeated success. And so when the Marvels come out, I'm going to be so intrigued to see what that does, because that will be like maybe like the 5th or 6th straight galactic MCU movie that we've gotten. I mean, with the exception of Black Panther Wakanda Forever, Doctor Strange is very supernatural. Thor Love and Thunder is galactic. Quantumania is galactic. Guardians of the Galaxy, galactic. The Marvels.
Exactly.
It's a lot of that, right? And so are we seeing maybe some backlash with that type of storytelling, and maybe more of a favor is going to be placed upon those grounded stories that we will get in 2024, like Captain America, like Thunderbolts? I'm very curious to see how that picture ultimately paints out to be over the next few months in the next year, but we'll certainly be on the lookout for all those updates. But with all of that out the way, let's go ahead and transition and talk about this movie as we are meant to do today, and get into our review of Marvel Studios' Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
The Guardians of the Galaxy have no place in my world.
Kiss your mom with that face?
Oh, no. Some corners of the universe consider him God.
It's a face-off.
Well, I guess we'll die trying. I decided die trying ain't our thing no more.
Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, rated PG-13. Get tickets now.
Now, this movie is written and directed by James Gunn, and it's starring an ensemble cast of Chris Pratt, Zoe Saldana, Dave Bautista, Karen Gillan, Pom Klementieff, Vin Diesel, Bradley Cooper, Sean Gunn, Chukwudi Iwuji, Will Poulter, Elizabeth Debicki, Maria Bakalova, Sylvester Stallone, and Nathan Fillion. So before we dive into all of our spoiler-filled thoughts and break down this film beat by beat, character by character, we're just going to start and give our non-spoiler big picture thoughts about the movie. Just in case you haven't seen it yet, you're still safe to just hear how we generally felt about the film. So we're not going to spoil any of the plot lines or any of the endings or any of the concluding elements that came out of this movie. We'll just stick to the generals and the basic information for now. So with all of that out the way, man, I'll officially pass it over to you. What did you think about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3?
I think it's time for us to, I think, recognize the brain and brilliance and artistry that is James Gunn. I think he has cemented himself as just a tremendous writer, a tremendous director, somebody who understands, I think, the material that he is given, from Suicide Squad to Peacemaker to Guardians to his older movies like Slither, to very guilty about this, but Scooby-Doo is one of my favorite movies, and he was a writer on Scooby-Doo 2002. I freaking love that movie. And Guardians Volume 3, I think, is a reflection of the greatness that he can bring to any project. And I think Marvel should be afraid, not necessarily afraid, but should be very saddened that this guy is exiting left. That being said, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a fun ass time. in the movie theater from beginning to end, man. It is a culmination of what happens when you understand characters and you're able to, I think, push them into new adventures while maintaining their own character arcs, while giving them most of them, something to do, while having, I think, while changing the things that we know about those characters. Not only that, but changing the things that we thought we knew about the movie as well. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is not like 1 or 2. It's darker. Sure, there's comedic tones like the first, like the second, but it's way darker. It's getting nitty and gritty into something that hasn't been talked about. And from an MCU point of view, per se, a lot of what we have talked about in this phase in particular has been a lot about grief. This movie has a little bit of that in it, but it's also about knowing yourself and finding yourself and where you're going in that universe, man. And I think this movie, I think, reflects what can be potentially a new step for the MCU, not because of what Guardians has been, but by the end of the film, what you feel like Guardians was, and when you leave those characters wherever they are, where you feel like they can go and can be. That's what makes Guardians of the Galaxy so great, man. This ragtag team they've become something else. And what that looks like by the end is just something that's, I think, very lovable and something to hold on to, man. This movie, from its acting to its action to the small comedy beats, is just tremendous. I think I love when people get a chance to tell their complete story. And this feels like James Gunn actually got a control of these characters. He started with Guardians 1, and by Guardians 3, he's like, every small detail, you understand that he understood and wrote these characters by which way. You know, a movie is good to me. A sequel is good when it elevates the previous iterations of that franchise. I watched Guardians 3, and by the end, I was like, damn, that made that moment in Guardians 1 feel better. That made that moment in Guardians 2 mean 10 times more than it meant before, because now we know context. Now we know a little bit more about certain characters. And to me, that's everything. I love that so much. That's it. Like, that's how you do it. That's how you make a franchise. That's how it's supposed to be done. And I have to say, man, Guardians 3, I think, does that on almost every level possible, man. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The music was exceptional. There's a specific song in this movie that had me hype as shit that we're going to talk about that I cannot believe they put in this movie. That was amazing, man. I even love the small details. I said it elevated some other things. It even elevated parts of Endgame. I was like, wait a second. This makes a lot of sense that this character is like this or feels this way. And now that made Endgame feel a little bit different too in that way, man. Let me go back to the acting real quick. I loved everybody, but one of the stands out specifically is Karen Gillan as Nebula. I thought she owned it. And I thought this was not necessarily her movie per se, right? It's clearly, if you ask anybody, it's definitely like a movie fueled by Rocket, even though it's not Rocket's movie, if that makes sense. But Karen Gillan as Nebula was tremendous. Everybody was tremendous. Zoe Saldana having to play this new kind of Gamora, I thought she did a great job being able to, I think, teeter the line of like what's new Gamora and those little tiny bits that you can still say, yeah, that is Gamora, but she's not the Gamora that you know. Tremendous job there, man. Of course, Rocket, Bradley Cooper as Rocket is going to do what he needs to do. Chris Pratt is still as charismatic as ever, still as good as ever. But man, what a cast, man. Dave Bautista is still the best actor or wrestler turned actor. It's not even close. I don't know why people keep talking about it. It's not even close. It's just it's a really good film, man. I enjoyed myself thoroughly. I will continuously to tell people to pull up and go see Guardians. Watch the Christmas special real quick, maybe. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, go watch the Christmas special, then you'll be fine. Go jump into Guardians 3 immediately after that. But I love this film. I hope other people like this film as much as I do, because it really is. This phase is not all bad. I know a lot of people think that phase 4, phase 5. This saga, I guess I should say, Multiverse Saga is not all bad. It is a lot of up and downs. It is a lot of roller coasters, but this is a high. And I think to be able to finish a story in this way is a tremendous feat, and James Gunn has done that. This is the only, it's not the only, but this is I think you might have talked about this. Me and you talked about this. This is the only trilogy where you feel like a set of characters has finished in their own trilogy. I love that. I really do. And it's something that we've never gotten in the MCU. And I'm glad to say James Gunn provided it for us, man. So yeah, a lot to talk about, but those are my initial thoughts.
Okay, well, I have a ton of sentimental value and goodwill that's been established with these characters. The Guardians movies have long been my favorite non-Avengers movies in the MCU, and that is just due to the fact of what James Gunn and the entire cast and crew have accomplished. So I'm predisposed already to being very favorable towards this movie and liking it, but that doesn't negate the fact that coming into Volume 3, especially after waiting 6 years, my expectations were really, really high. And I was also a little bit nervous. I was very faithful to what James Gunn could accomplish and do just because he's proven himself time and time again. He even went over to another studio, the competitor, so to say, and was able to knock it out of the park with those characters. And so I never doubted him. But just due to everything we've talked about around the MCU and just some of the shaky ground that they currently exist on, I was still somewhat nervous. Like, oh, please don't mess up my precious Guardians. Like, let's get this right, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad to say that this is an incredibly satisfying conclusion to the journey that these particular Guardians have gone on. And considering that this is an ensemble film with a huge cast, James Gunn and his entire team, they do a really good job of juggling all of the plot lines and most of the characters, especially the core characters, a part of this particular team, because everybody gets their moment and their opportunity to shine. And I think when you pull back a little bit and look at it from a macro perspective, this movie also succeeds because it's unburdened by the expectations of franchising or developing future spinoffs or other sequels, other projects. It doesn't have to do any of that stuff. For example, you look at a recent movie, a movie in which I like, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. On top of the stuff that it had to do, they were also simultaneously setting up an Ironheart series, setting up a potential Dora Milaje Disney Plus series. That's not to say that you can't do those things, but it had a lot to do. And I think that took away from some of the central narrative and storylines that we were really, really hoping to see out of that movie. Even Quantumania recently is setting up a multi-movie arc with the Avengers' next big bad villain that they're going to face over the course of the next 3 to 4 years. We don't have to worry about any of that when you watch Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. There's none of that extra baggage. It exists on its own merits. And you go back into the specifics of it, it's more of a personal story about the Guardians fighting for one of their own. It's about them fighting to protect their lives and their livelihood. We're not talking about universal stakes. The multiverse is not even at stake in this movie. And you add that fact on top of the fact that James Gunn is such a special filmmaker because many of his projects, not just the Marvel movies, but many of his projects are often about outcasts who have to overcome some level of adversity, right? They have to overcome some big obstacle in front of them. And when you get that underdog spirit incorporated into his movies, that underscores just the amount of heart that all of his projects have. And that makes them so relatable, that makes them so enjoyable because we see ourselves in a lot of these characters. You see yourself as the underdog in certain situations. And so automatically, even if you're talking about an animal or machine, part machine, part human, whatever it may be, something that just doesn't feel real, it feels more fantastical. He always grounds it in those human emotions to make us relate to it that much more. You combine all that stuff with the technical aspects of this movie, and I think that you get one of the more complete blockbuster film experiences that we've gotten over the past few years, because there's some fantastic visuals. James Gunn's eye for camera movement and the way that he moves the camera, it feels even more immersive now than it has in his previous projects. The production design in this movie is absolutely top-notch, world-class, incredible, because we got so many actual real sets, real environments, and there's multiple locations all throughout this movie that actually feel tangible and they feel lived in. It reminded me a lot of the old Star Wars where, you had special effects to enhance things, but they built this shit. They actually built it from the ground up to make it feel like a place that actually existed. You combine that with probably some of the best VFX we've gotten in a Marvel movie in quite a few years. Yeah. And it's like, wow, they actually knocked that stuff out of the park. Some of the technical stuff that we've been often critical of over recent projects, they knocked it out of the park. I mean, there were just so many incredible sets. The courtyard that they built nowhere, the Guardians' new ship, the Bowie, even the High Evolutionary ships, all the interior stuff there was just absolutely phenomenal to look at. And I think that this just all goes back to the incredible eye that James Gunn has for visuals. He's such a visual director, and that just goes all the way back to his days directing films for Troma. Like he leaned on special effects. He knows that playground. And so when he has to incorporate special effects and then level it up to visual effects, I think he's one of the best in the industry right now that can bring that stuff to life and make it feel believable and make you buy into what he's actually pulling off. And I think outside of that stuff, outside of all the praise, I do have a few small nitpicks that I'll touch upon when we get into spoilers. But I think the things that bothered me about the film that weren't exactly home runs, it doesn't have anything to do with the central core team. Like nothing is wrong with that stuff. All the elements that I have an issue with lie outside of the core team. Those are some of the weaker elements of the story, just because you can tell they're trying to do some new things, introduce some new characters. And that just doesn't always work because we have to spend so much time with the characters that we have known and loved for the better part of 10 years now. So with all of that said, I'll just close out and say that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, to me, is the best MCU movie since Avengers Endgame. I'm very confident in saying that. And I'm actually removing Spider-Man No Way Home from that conversation just because so much of that movie relies on the legacy of Sony Spider-Man films that they built.
How crossover it is.
That those things precede the MCU. Like when you think about the Tobey Maguire films, like Marvel Studios doesn't have anything to do with that. And so it's a different anomaly altogether. So if you remove that out of the equation, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 to me is the best MCU movie since Avengers Endgame. And furthermore, Guardians of the Galaxy as a franchise is the definitive best trilogy in the MCU. It's not Spider-Man, it's not Captain America, it's sure as hell not Iron Man or Ant-Man.
Nope,
like it's definitely Guardians of the Galaxy. And the last thing that I'll quickly say is that this movie sort of symbolically kind of feels like the end of the old MCU, the MCU era that we've just come to know and love for almost 15 years now, because all the stuff that we used to associate with the MCU as we knew it, it's pretty much no more now officially, because Iron Man is gone, Robert Downey Jr. is out of there, Chris Evans as Captain America is gone, Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow is gone. Tragically, Chadwick Boseman, his iteration of Black Panther won't continue. Now James Gunn and the Guardians of the Galaxy are effectively gone. Like that's really it for the old MCU. And I think Marvel Studios losing James Gunn is a massive L. They are going to feel that for the next decade, plus probably if DC is able to do what we hope and expect them to do, because he's about to go down the road at Warner Brothers and he's the big shit over there. He's the big man on campus now, because it's going to be coming from his brain, his vision, all the ideas that he has to build out that new DC universe. And so I'd be quite sad if I were Marvel Studios to lose a talent like him, because he truly brings something extraordinarily special to these projects, to these characters, and to this franchise over the past 10 years. And so I loved it. I think it's great. People should definitely check it out if they have not seen it. So with all of those thoughts out the way, folks, we're going to dive in. We're going to talk spoilers about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So if you've not seen this movie, we definitely encourage you to go check it out, go watch the movie, and then you can come back and finish the rest of the conversation, because we will certainly be here. So that being said, let's start off our conversation and go character by character as we typically do, and just sort of break down all of the major and memorable moments. And I think it's only fair and only appropriate that we start with Rocket, voiced by Bradley Cooper, because while this is a Guardians of the Galaxy movie by name, this is really the story of Rocket. So much time and attention and focus is placed upon him. The movie, in fact, begins and ends with him. Those are the first shots that we see, and those are the last shots that we see. And Bradley Cooper is coming back for like maybe the 7th, 8th, or even 9th time to voice this character who, back in 2014, I don't think anybody could have predicted that Rocket would go on to become as popular as he has, mostly due to just his existence and presence throughout these films. And so we'll talk about specific moments and get to the major developments with Rocket as a character throughout this movie. But I just want to start and just get your general thoughts, man. How did you think Bradley Cooper did as the voice actor once again behind Rocket? And what did you think about just the story that we saw all throughout this film?
Yeah, Bradley Cooper has done a tremendous job as Rocket, as much as, of course, the visual effects team has done too. Rocket has always looked great as a completely, and for the most part, visual effect, character. He has always looked tremendous. And Bradley Cooper has always, I think, fit the look of Rocket. We learn his voice as Rocket, and I think he carries everything into this movie. In fact, in this story, in seeing Little Rocket, there are little, I think, nuances and things that Rocket says as a young Rocket, where you're like, wait, Big Rocket talks like that. I really love, I think, those little things like that. And man, what a story that Rocket has here, man. I think, we talk about music in the movie, but in the fact that this movie is driven by Rocket, right? And his situation, his sickness, I don't know what to call it per se. Injury? Let's go with injury. Rocket in his injury. I love that it opens with Creep, right? Sure, it's this big popular song that we've all come to, I think, love for the most part. I used to sing the hell out of this song on Rock Band, 10 out of 10. But like, it actually meant something, I think, if that makes sense. A lot of times you'll hear a song like this in a movie or something. It's just like, okay, the Sonics are good, but Guardians is known to start off upbeat. Guardians is known to come in and you be like, dang, I really like this song. It usually ends that way as well. And you come into Guardians Volume 3 and Rocket is playing Creep on his Zune. What's happening here? Why is Creep is usually known as a sad song? Why are we starting with this sad song? And that's when I knew that I had already knew, I think, at that moment, that this movie was going to be different because we started with a song like Creep. When you see him sit down and you throw through his Zune, I'm like, okay, he's better play something happy, or nope, not Rocket. He started playing Creep by Radiohead. And I thought that really told a lot of what I needed to know from up front about what Rocket was going through, or about what he was feeling, from alienation to all of it, things of his past, a lot of it, man. And yeah, I'll just start there. Like, I really love the beginning. I really love that it started with Rocket, and that the movie is kind of his story, right? Kind of about him. Again, he's not, I think people will watch this movie and be quick to say Rocket is maybe the heart of the movie or the focal point of the movie, but sure, a focal point is accurate, but I don't think he's completely the heart of the movie either. But I just think his situation drives it, if that makes sense, because I think the heart really does lie in all the Guardians together in a lot of different ways, but it's something about Rocket's story that brings them together. And so I don't think he's the heart. I say he's the glue. Let's go with that. Rocket is the glue of the story to me, and I really love that about it. And it really made for a different kind of film.
Yeah, I mean, it's a few ways to look at it. I would say he's the protagonist of the story because it is all through his perspective and told through his vantage point and his eyes, really, because so much of this movie takes place in the past, and all of the future events, I should say the present day events, are because of the momentum and the things that occur with him that have to all of a sudden influence the remaining events of the story. But I just got to say, first, with Bradley Cooper, this guy is incredible because he's one of the very few famous voice actors who portrays a character so well that I never ever think about Bradley Cooper. I'm never sitting in any of these movies or projects thinking like, oh, there's Bradley Cooper's voice. I always forget that it's Bradley Cooper until maybe the end of the movie. I see his name in the credits, or I'm watching an interview where he's talking about his experience playing Rocket. And that's just a testament to what he brings to this role. It's so valuable. And I think now in this day and age, when we look at these huge animated films that come out, these big tentpole movies, they have changed so much over the past 25 to 30 years because now animated movies often have high profile A-list talent that voice characters, where that did not used to be the case. If you go back to animated movies in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, even the 90s, they were portrayed by voice animated actors, seasoned voice animated actors, like the people that we grew up with. Even when you watch old cartoons from the 90s, your Cree Summers or all those people like Phil Lamar, those were voice actors. And now we just get celebrities to portray characters. And that's not to say that they're not good. I think sometimes they can be really good. We even see a Chris Pratt who all of a sudden is just getting thrown into every project. He's going to be Super Mario. He's going to be Garfield. And sometimes he's good. Sometimes he's like, okay, well, maybe we could have used somebody else. But I think Bradley Cooper, with everything he's just brought to this role, it's just been so iconic. The voice that he's created, the style that he's infused with Rocket, and just the emotional heart of that humanity that you can see within this animal, this almost this creation, this scientific creation to a certain extent. It's kind of crazy that he's able to walk that line in terms of being a huge high profile A-list actor, but also being like an incredible voice actor that's uniquely suited for this particular role. It's really, really impressive. But to go to the start of the movie, we do snap to the opening on Nowhere. As you mentioned, we hear those opening notes from Radiohead, and we're going to talk about the needle drops. There's going to be a whole section for sure. But we are seeing the Guardians in sort of a place of just not being that happy. They're not celebratory as we're used to seeing them be. Rocket is definitely kind of walking around, sort of slouching, head down, not really engaging with the citizens and the people of Nowhere. We know due to the Christmas special that they've purchased Nowhere. That's now Guardians of the Galaxy headquarters in the universe. Quill is like off drunk somewhere, of course, and we'll get to that as well. But Rocket is eventually attacked by Adam Warlock because the High Evolutionary sends him to retrieve Rocket because of their previous experience together. And immediately Rocket is just taken off of the chessboard. All of the events that happen in this movie with Rocket primarily take place in the past because he's lying on a hospital bed for the majority of the first two acts. And so we actually get to go back in time and witness the origin story of Rocket and see how he came to be, which is something that they've been alluding to in the other films. And James Gunn has frequently talked about that Rocket has long been his favorite character, the one that he most identifies with, just because of its upbringing and his backstory and his origin story. And we see that it's quite tragic. We see that it's very painful, and that contributes to all of the dark feelings that are incorporated throughout this film. And we see that he was experimented on at a very, very, very young age, because even that opening shot when the High Evolutionary reaches into the cage, Rocket is the only raccoon that is like curious. He's not scared like the other raccoons in the cage. Like, he actually is kind of fearful, but he's also kind of curious at that young age, only to find out that these people are gonna pretty much torture him and experiment on him and just do really heinous things. And that leads us to meeting his friends, which, we'll definitely talk about his other comrades that he grew up with. But what were your thoughts just seeing just the horrific nature of how Rocket came to be?
Yeah, it's crazy. This movie, you could argue, is like a big ass PETA advertisement, low key. But in talking about, I think, Guardians of the Galaxy, and us as viewers, we have always known, or well, I've always known at least, but most people have always known that his full name is Rocket Raccoon, right? And so throughout the entire MC, this man has been saying, I'm not a raccoon, I'm not a raccoon. He said it so much, I started to believe it for a second. I'm okay, maybe he's some space otter that we don't know about or something. But there's some, it's the animal of it all that I think James Gunn was genius to tap into, because not only have we learned and become accustomed to and grown to love Rocket as a character, but we got to face it. People love animals. What kind of horror can I ingest in this film, as James Gunn has horror roots, then to torture animals? It's kind of genius when you think about it, because like, it's going to tug at almost anybody's heartstring. If you don't see like one of the animals, Rocket or any of his pals, go through this torture or look crazy because they got experimented on, you might be a psychopath. You might need to be evaluated, because instantly, without knowing any of those other characters, we felt for them, and knowing Rocket is like a through the roof, you know what I mean, kind of thing that we feel when we see how he's treated by the High Evolutionary when he's younger. Not only that, but we had heard stories of Rocket, or at least glimpses of what Rocket both is and what he went through. And that's the part I say elevates other movies. He had argued about Drax losing people in Guardians 1. He had talked to Lynx. We actually just kind of talked about this. He had talked to Lynx, to Yondu, about how they're similar in whatever ways, you know what I mean? And then we see him actually go through the process. We actually see his upbringing. We actually see what they're doing to Rocket, and it instantly becomes a story that we're bought into. Again, not only because it's like some animal being tortured, but because Rocket, who you just said, Bradley Cooper has voiced his character 7-8 times already, somebody we have gotten accustomed to, is now almost quite literally on the surgical table. You know what I'm saying? And so it's I think it's a great place to start a film, knowing just knowing what we know about Rocket, knowing what we know about the Guardians in this time, and being able to focus on him, I thought was just a really good choice, man. Again, I love the horror elements James Gunn puts in when it comes to the animals and the torture and upbringing of Rocket. I actually love the parts of Rocket that began to feel human after he gained his intelligence, where he goes, oh, what is this sound that I'm hearing? And High Evolutionary is like, it's music. He was like, oh, do we like it? He's like, yeah, we like it. He's like, okay, cool. Of course, like I feel like that's also a heartstring, right? It feels like you're watching somebody grow up in real time. And it's those humanoid things too with Rocket that make you go, man, I feel that. That makes a lot of sense. And so, yeah, man, I really loved everything that they were doing there, because there's so many, not stakes, because it is a flashback. Stakes isn't the word, but I guess being able to buy into a story that had already been told, that really does, I think, just reflect the morality of who we're dealing with at the time. Those flashbacks, of course, made High Evolutionary look different too, made him look a little bit more demented, I think, than we realized coming in. But man, the work they did with Rocket in this movie, I thought was really good. We don't get flashbacks like that. Imagine if we got a Thanos tearing apart Nebula. You know what I'm saying? Like it would feel different. And we actually got these moments with Rocket, and we don't get that with every character. So yeah, I really liked everything that we're doing here.
I mean, by the time we meet Rocket as a character in the MCU in Guardians Volume 1, you look at the guy and you're like, dude, you're kind of an asshole. You're always angry. You feel bitter about something, and we don't really know. And he's lashing out. He's very, very emotional when people call him certain things or make fun of him or pick on him. And we don't really get the information and the enlightenment of why he's that way until this movie, until 9-10 years later. And you see this stuff unfold and you're like, oh, this just informs you as a person and why you grew up to be the way that you are, because you literally went through hell, my guy. Like, you went through the worst of circumstances. You were plucked out of a situation that you didn't ask to be taken out of. And then all of a sudden to be experimented on multiple times, and then not treated as any respectable creature at all. You're not shown any real love or dignity. You're not provided with a healthy living environment. And then the only real solace that you have is with these immediate friends that you're able to find around you who are also in the same terrible circumstances. It's just so enriching to him as a character. And it just really broke my heart, because the first words that he utters when you see him as a very, very small raccoon is hurts, and he's shaking because of the experiment that they just did on his brain, and how they cut open his head to just examine his brain and to see what his intelligence level would be like, and to see what the opportunities would be for them lying ahead. And that's where he meets those other characters. But I just love all throughout these flashbacks the fact that we also, outside of the trauma, get to see how Rocket became this brilliant genius. Like, he's actually a really, really brilliant character. He's a mechanic. He's a pilot. He's a scientist. It actually reminded me of a moment from Avengers Endgame when Tony Stark is like talking shit. Rocket is working on the ship, and he's like, hey, watch it. You're only a genius on Earth, my guy. Like, don't think you're a genius everywhere. That's actually very valid from Rocket, because he knows things that Tony Stark could never know, just because of his existence and the way that he lives. And so I just love that we can focus in on those elements that also contributed to how brilliant and talented of a hero he really could be. But that does lead us to meeting his friends. We do see that Rocket is able to form some relationships with some other creatures who are also being experimented on by the High Evolutionary. In fact, these are 3 other types of creatures. They're not raccoons, but it's an otter, a rabbit, and a walrus. And they're named Lila, Floor, and Teefs, as we come to find out throughout the story. And they come to be incredibly important to Rocket. These are not just like people he meets due to the circumstances of being in a hellacious situation, which is true, but he actually goes on to form a real relationship with these characters and have memorable moments and actually have fun with them and have joy with them. And we see how that gets to develop across this film, and how they have dreams and ambitions of their own. They want to go and do things and explore this new world that apparently the High Evolutionary is creating, which unfortunately resulted in a tragic end. But what were your thoughts on just seeing these other characters, sort of inform Rocket's upbringing, but also provide, I guess, a sense of comfort for who he could be in terms of having people he can relate to, but also having people that he can dream about in terms of building a future with?
Yeah, it is his first family post removal of his community with the other raccoons, man. It's literally when he ends up they do an experiment, he ends up getting his intelligence. They are literally the first people that he meets. And I think that is so important in the development of a person. If you think about the first person, that, again, a lot of people we come out of the womb, we see our moms. You know what I'm saying? He, in some ways, came out of not necessarily the womb, right? But he came out of the surgical table. This is the first people he meets is these friends, and it's so telling that it is the first community and the first family that he really has. Of course, they say friends, and friends is a big thing for them. Of course, they're friends, but really, that is his first family. That is the people he's laughing with and playing with, and they all can relate to each other. Like you said, it's such a important piece to who Rocket is as a person, having that community, and it's so very well done. Of course, when you first see them all, they all feel like Sid's experiments, right, from Toy Story. Everyone, and you're like, what is going on here? And I think what's so important about that is none of the animals were like ever really mad or angry. They were actually pretty, maybe toxic, optimistic people, to the point where it's just like, man, y'all are kind of happy given the circumstances, that's going on. Especially something I think is really interesting. I think they made the intelligence of the animals accurate to their real counterparts. Does that make sense? Like, raccoons are really fucking smart. Otters are really fucking smart. Rabbits, they're not that smart. And Flora, low key, was like, that girl was a little loopy. I don't know. She wasn't all the way there. And walruses are smart too, but probably not as smart as raccoons and otters potentially. So I thought that was interesting because it actually showed in their personalities, and it made sense because the High Evolutionary wouldn't know much about those animals. That's part of the reason why they're studying them, right? They wouldn't know what we know. And so I thought that was also like a really cool detail that I don't know if other people noticed. That was really cool. But man, what a again, I think it was that optimism within that group that made you attached to them, though, right? You see Rocket and you see he's in this terrible situation. You're like, oh, he has friends. And I think knowing what we know about Rocket now and the things that he's kind of said through small quips, or that I feel like we knew where those characters would end up. I think we all had a feeling, but it's different when you see it play out. It's different when you watch it. And that's what makes it like, damn, like it's like double sad. In some ways, it's almost like we had to relive it because again, I feel like we knew, but it's like, no, here's what actually happened. You're like, man, yeah, I'm sorry, Rocket. I understand why you are the way you are. I understand why you treated the Guardians the way you treat the Guardians. All of it. So yeah, I thought they were pretty well done, and they all looked good. Good CGI. I really love seeing the test footage from James Gunn on social media too. It's like, oh man, they put work into these otters, or they put work into these raccoons. They put work into everybody, man. Last thing I'll say, shout out to Linda Cardinelli for, I guess, coming back to play another character. I thought that was pretty cool. That she came back. But yeah, man, crazy stuff.
Yeah, Linda Cardellini, she also plays Laura Barton in the MCU, Hawkeye's wife. And so she's coming here to voice his character. Also has worked with James Gunn a few times prior to this film. But I think that optimism that they had was based on a lie, because they thought that they were going to be the species to populate counter Earth. That's at least their assumption, that they were going into counter Earth to build this new world. And so I think that that's why those characters were so optimistic. Even Rocket was optimistic to a certain extent when he used to interface and converse with the High Evolutionary. You could tell he was afraid of him, but he also could still have a conversation with him and point out different things and talk about the future and what that could look like. And they were building these hopes and ambitions, ultimately to find out that they were never meant to populate counter Earth. They were just merely test subjects as he built them and designed them to be. And that's where everything exploded. That was the big moment that sort of was the turning point for Rocket. We'll circle back to their demise, unfortunately, when we do talk about the High Evolutionary, because that certainly warrants its own conversation. But let's move on and talk about Chris Pratt as Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord, who has often been the front man, the leader of this group of the Guardians of the Galaxy, very reminiscent of what's occurred in the comics. And we reach Peter Quill in a very dark place as well, similarly to Rocket. In the opening moments of this movie, my guy is drunk. He is just drinking. He doesn't really know how to deal with himself. And it's pretty clear in the early moments that he's reeling from the loss, quote unquote, of Gamora. We know that Gamora perished in Avengers Infinity War at the hands of her father, Thanos. He threw off a cliff. And so the Gamora that exists now is not their Gamora. It's not the Guardians of the Galaxy Gamora that we saw develop and grow over those first two movies. This is a different Gamora. This is an alternate reality Gamora that is come out of the events of Avengers Endgame and has gone off to become a part of the Ravager faction within this movie. And so she has no recollection of any of those moments that her and Peter built together, because that's not her. That's not her existence. She lives an entirely different existence. And so Peter, he's depressed about it. He's very upset. He clearly does not know how to handle it emotionally. And so we see him in a dark place to begin with, until he all of a sudden finds a purpose. And that purpose is to save his friend's life, when we see Rocket is attacked and mortally wounded by Adam Warlock early on in the movie. But those first opening moments were like, oh man, you were definitely going through something. And it was almost, to be honest, it was a little jarring for me, because Peter Quill was not that way at all in Thor: Love and Thunder. He was a very inspirational, uplifting guy. He was actually the one to pick up Thor and say, like, my dude, you've been existing for 1,500 years and you don't really know who you are. And maybe you need to go find yourself. And I thought that Peter Quill had sort of taken on this more mentorship sort of capacity. He'd grown to be more of a, I don't want to say a fatherly figure, but maybe a big brother figure who can use his own life experience and his humanity to impart wisdom on others. And that might still somewhat be true, but we see a lot of that isn't really present here, at least in those first few moments. But what did you think about just the place that he is in at the opening moments of this movie as a character, the fact that he is dealing with the loss of Gamora?
Yeah, especially, you talk about the big brother thing, especially when I think what's so important in this movie is how people respect him as a captain. Everyone's like, okay, Cap, we got you, Cap. And, before, not saying that wasn't a thing in like Guardians 2 or anything, but it was still like something I think everyone was still coming to terms with. Of course, him and Rocket still was like always arguing about it's my shit, blah, blah, blah. This was the movie where everyone was like, no, Peter Quill is the captain. Like, he is the guy from the get-go. And when you see him, I think, depressed, and not only just depressed, but drinking a lot. I think one of the jarring things about that, not even that he was drunk, but they look at him and they go, again? I was like, wait a second. And this is actually one of the small nitpicks for the movie for me. I wish they carried it a little harder throughout the film, right? Like, I feel like if you had been drinking for however long he's been drinking, right, over and over, I feel like maybe, let's say he sees Gamora for the first time, he should have took a drink. You know what I'm saying? Like
a relapse almost.
Yeah, I feel like he still should have been drinking in the middle of the movie, or we should have got some kind of drunk Star-Lord, because I feel like throughout the film, we never get that moment where he's like, yeah, I can't do this anymore. Or, you know what I'm saying? I shouldn't do this thing anymore, especially if it's something that he's been doing for a while. Everyone's like, again? It's something, it was a small thing with Star-Lord I feel like it was missing. I was like, we're not going to talk about this? That's all it takes is for Rocket to be hurt, for him to kind of get out of this episode. I don't know. I just expected some other beat in there for them to be like, either, yeah, he's still drinking a lot, or he had some kind of revelation that he should come out of it, but we never really get that. And that's one of my small nitpicks with the movie. He did have a character arc, just not 100% dealing with that. I wish they dealt with that a little bit more. But man, yeah, it's a crazy way, I think, to start off a film. Not only is who you, in my mind, I would count as the second in command, right, in a Rocket. I feel like who he gets taken off the board, and now you're telling me the real captain, the captain of the ship, is drinking profusely at this point in time. It's just a crazy way, I think, to start a movie, and for you to understand, I think, how not awry they were. They still seem pretty put together as a team, but I think how their individual stories were affecting them. So yeah, I thought it was still a cool way to start the film.
Yeah, to what you said earlier about just the opening moments, it's a stark tonal shift, because even past Thor: Love and Thunder, in the way that we saw him, when you look at the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special, he seems a little despondent, but he's nowhere near the level of what he's like in this movie. And perhaps that's just a day where he decides, like, I'm not going to drink today. I'm going to do the work that I have to do. Maybe it's early in the day. It probably just is not, reached sunset, so he's not ready to drink yet. But in that special, I could see the motions and the wheels turning, that this guy isn't exactly who he used to be. He's not the chipper, charismatic character that we've come to know and I guess love over the course of these movies, but he also was not dealing with this in a way that was pretty much unhealthy, and to a degree in which it became a really bad habit that they would point it out. It almost seemed like when Nebula picked him up to carry him to his bed, that's routine. Like, they know exactly what to do. They know exactly where to go. As you said, Batista is Drax is just like, again, like we're gonna do this again. They go and pick up their shish kebabs. This has become just like the daily thing that they kind of do, right? And
did.
so it's sad to see that, but as you said, it was one of those threads that they never really revisited. They revisited the Gamora stuff, absolutely, which is sort of the impetus and the origin point for why he's feeling the way that he feels, but the consequences of that and the condition that sort of embedded in him as an individual, they didn't really go back to that at all.
Yep.
It would have probably been useful to see him pick up at least one more liquor bottle at some point, as you said, to really hammer it home. So I agree. Beyond that, though, you know, Peter Quill in this movie, as you mentioned, does step up as the leader, and it's really known across the team that this guy is the captain. For better and for worse, you know, he's carrying them all across these different situations to help save the life of Rocket. But I think a lot of that gets interrupted by the reemergence of Gamora, who is the person that he had been talking about and referencing for many, many moments in this movie until they finally show her and she reappears once again. And that leads us to talking about Gamora, played by Zoe Saldana. As I mentioned, this is not the same one. We know that she did perish in Avengers Infinity War. This one, coming into this movie, we found out that she would be a part of the Ravager faction, which is sort of a new sort of avenue for her. And she's joined up and joined forces with Sakaar, played by Sylvester Stallone. And we get to see her be really embraced and be really sort of a leader in her own right for this other faction, this opposing faction. And we get to see how different she is. And I think what I love the most about what Zoe Saldana brought to this particular iteration, it's almost like she had to create an entirely new character. Like the Gamora that we knew, she's nothing like this new Gamora. She's very much more, she was always independent and always a fierce warrior, but I think we got to see a lot of that in this movie. Like we got to see a lot of that rage kind of behind her, because now she's not behind Thanos anymore. She got from underneath that shadow. She's forming her own identity, but she's still super confident and super capable of killing and whooping anybody's ass. But she's also very much angry because Quill keeps reminding her of this past that she doesn't know anything about. She's like, shut the fuck up, bro. That's not me. And so we get to see her play with all these different emotions. Well, what did you think about Zoe Saldana, again, coming in, you know, sort of as another big lead for this group, but is on the outskirts now. She is not a part of the Guardians. She's a part of a entirely separate faction, but still has to find her way back in working with the Guardians this time.
Man, Zoe Saldana is an incredible actress. I have to put that out there first, because man, I mean, just think about her work, man, between this and Avatar and shoot, Star Trek. The woman is good, man. She really is. You could tell she's tired of it too. She's like, get me out of here. But man, like you said, it's almost like she had to create a new character, but there are still, it's crazy, right? It's like, oh, I have to be Gamora up until this point. Now I have to make a new Gamora while keeping all that old up until this point Gamora. It's like really, I don't know. I think it's a really cool, challenge as an actor or actress to have to do something like that. And it made her that much more interesting when she was on the screen. Because the whole time I'm like, okay, but what is she going to say next? Because this isn't the Gamora we know. She may look like her, but she's not her. Even then, what I really like is I think the influence that you could tell the Ravagers has had on this Gamora. The moment where she's about to punch Peter, you're like, wait a second. Everybody was like that. It surprised everybody. Like everybody in the theater was like, whoa. And, you know, Nebula stops her, but it's something about that moment where you're like, yeah, you are off the hinges. This is not the Gamora we know. Not only is it because of the Ravagers, though, but it's because the groundwork that Peter Quill had done to soften her up also isn't there. Because in some ways, not that same Gamora per se, but that angry, I want to punch something, like you said, the warrior Gamora is in there. But again, Peter Quill was like, okay, let's dance. You know what I mean? Peter Quill was like, Peter Quill has softened up the Gamora that we had come to know. This Gamora doesn't have that. None of it. Not only that, but now there's years have gone by without her having that. She has evolved into something else. The Ravagers do have to do certain things that the Guardians don't do. Guardians are seen as heroes. Ravagers probably closer to anti-heroes, right? In terms of they need to do what needs to be done. This Gamora was shooting people and legs and all kind of crazy stuff we never expect from Gamora. But I love that because it allowed them to do new things in this movie. Seeing her shoot somebody was crazy to me. I said, I don't know what movie I'm watching, but I'm not sure it's still Guardians of the Galaxy. I don't know what this is. But again, I really like that about her character, man. So I thought they did a tremendous job with Gamora. She was one of the low key, probably one of my favorite characters in this movie, just because how much newness they had to do. Probably not the favorite, but they brought a lot to the table with this new Gamora, and I liked it.
I think that this is probably the best performance Zoe Saldana has given as this character because it does have to be so nuanced. She is very defensive and hardened by all of her experiences. She's also losing a lot of patience with Quill. And she still gets to have those comedic beats as well. Like all throughout the movie, I am Groot is saying I am Groot. And she's like, why do you keep telling me that? Like, stop saying your name. And then there's that one moment where I am Groot. He says I am Groot. And Nebula is able to decipher everything she says. And she's like, huh? Like, you got all of that from I am Groot? Like, there's no way. So she has to go to so many different levels and so many different ranges that I don't think she's necessarily had to do before. We've seen Zoe Saldana act her ass off, especially in Infinity War. That was such an emotional roller coaster with her relationship with Thanos and how much she had to carry in that movie because she was so important. But this time out, man, I noticed sort of a sense of freedom, a sense of losing a lot of the weight that she had to bring to the movie ahead of time because of those previous performances, but also still being able to maintain just a little bit of that, like not losing it entirely, because there would be those moments when she would catch a glimpse with Peter and you're like, are they about to do it again? Or they would just, happen to be crossing paths or whatever it was. It was really cool stuff to see. I want to transition and talk about the next big action set piece after we transition from nowhere. And that's on this organic matter location called the Orgosphere or Orgoscope, whatever it's called. It's a place made up of organic matter, and it's essentially this scientific medical outpost that has the information that the Guardians need in order to get to reverse the kill switch that is on Rocket's heart, because they can't do any sort of surgery or operate on him due to the mortal wounds he suffered at the hands of Adam Warlock, because High Evolutionary pretty much put a kill switch on his heart. So if anybody operated on him, it would automatically go off and kill him. So they are in a very precarious situation. So we go to the Orgosphere. Again, it's made up of just nothing but medical matter, and it's a really weird but also beautifully realized location. I was just super impressed by the design of it all and just how it looked throughout this movie, because it was just such a unique and different thing. When you go into these Marvel movies or really any sort of sci-fi picture, I think you have a certain expectation of what galactic looks like and what aliens look like, what all of that stuff can look like. But the imagination that it takes to bring new things to life altogether, or at least pull inspiration from comics and translate it to the big screen, that's a whole nother different type of level entirely. And what they did here with just the white sort of organic background to make it look like a medical facility, but also still keep it looking alien, I thought was just super impressive. And it also was a really fun action set piece because it played like a heist. They were going in there to get information. Yeah. So there were high stakes. They had to find some information, and we run into all sorts of different characters throughout the sequence. It might actually be my favorite set piece of the entire movie because of how long we're here and also because of the funny moments that occur. But what did you think about just the design of it, the look of it, and just the purpose that it played throughout the movie?
Yeah, I loved, again, not only how good it looked, but I love how weird it was. I was like, this is the most James Gunn thing I've ever seen, because I'm not even sure this is a comic thing at all. I haven't seen anything about it, at least. I was like, what the heck is this Orgosphere? And it literally, what they said, is put together by like organic matter, actual tissue, and it looks like that, like you said. And not only that, but it does look like an eye, kind of like that's moving. It's just crazy how much it's a whole facility that does look like the remnants of a body of like a real like organic matter. It's crazy. I don't know who came up with this and how they drew it or art. They be tripping. Somebody be tripping somewhere, man. I don't know how they come up with some of this stuff, but I did love it. And I was so surprised by how much time we spent here, though. I was like, oh shoot, we've been here a while, like
20 something minutes, maybe.
Yeah, I was like, this is a movie, but we are kicking it on the Orgosphere, man. It's kind of crazy, but it just had most of the favorite moments in this movie come from the sequence, though, from when they leave the ship in their colorful astronaut gear. Now, wow, just the way it looked by itself. I was like, does anybody else see this? How tremendous they got this to look. Not only was it galactic, but it had a color palette. The fact that everything was to look as good as it was. I loved how bright everything was. I loved a lot of things that were coming out of it, man. And I also talked about another moment, though, when they land on the Orgosphere and Nebula has to open whatever it is, the surface. The CGI is incredible. Like, they do this thing on purpose where they zoom in and her hand does whatever her hand does, and it pulls out a piece of the Orgosphere. And he like intentionally was like, look how good this looks, because they zoom in on it. I was like, y'all are crazy for this. But like, of course, if something looks that good, they probably spent so much time rendering and putting things in it. Of course, they would zoom in on it and be like, look at this. And it's funny how little of a moment that is, but if y'all understand visual effects and how hard that is to pull off and make it look the way they looked, it was kind of crazy. I was like, do y'all see this?
That's probably
It's
6 months worth of work in that one shot alone. That's how long stuff like takes.
I was like, what is this? Because it looks like a sponge thing, but space is behind it. Gamora's hand is a fucking
it's like
nanotech. There's so much happening. I was like, it's just wild, man. And so yeah, that the Orgosphere in general, man, it was cracking. Like you said, we both love heist movies. You know what I'm saying? It is what it is. But you add everything on top of that, the James Gunn of it all, the colorful suits, the music, how good it looked. It was just really cool. And it's somewhere I didn't expect to end up. And I think that's another thing that made me excited. I was like, what the hell is this? Let's do it. And that's exactly what it was, a fun adventure somewhere else that we've never seen. And that's what Guardians is. And it really maintained, I think, all of those characteristics of what Guardians was supposed to be in that Orgosphere act.
Yeah, really fun stuff. You get Nathan Fillion here, who had a pretty substantial role in this section of the movie. He was there for quite a while as one of the main security guards. Also, Jennifer Holland, James Gunn's wife, reappears here. We've known her as Harcourt over in the DC universe. Daniela Melchior is also playing Ura, who was Ratcatcher 2 in the Suicide Squad. So, as we know James Gunn to do, working with people that he likes to work with frequently and incorporate throughout this movie. But yeah, there's so many good moments. As you mentioned earlier, Gamora shoots Jennifer Holland's character in the leg just with no hesitation at all, and she just screams out loud. It's like, whoa, where did that come from? And she's just like super aggressive because she also just interrupts Quill's plan. He thinks he's going to be really charming towards Uda, and Gamora just steps in like, fuck all that noise. Like, I'm about to hold her at gunpoint so we can get out of here and get what we need. There's also a really funny moment too when Mantis and Drax are entering like the main corridor and they run into the main security guard, and Mantis is just like playing around and she makes him fall in love with Drax. She uses her mind control, like you're in love, you're hopelessly in love with him, and the guy is just hitting on Drax, and you can tell like, Drax is like you fuck you, Mantis, like, what are you doing right now? Like, now you're gonna do this again? You could tell he was just super agitated by it. So there were just so many really cool moments injected throughout this big action set piece, which brings us to the needle drops in this movie, because there was a big one in this one, but I want to talk about the needle drops as a whole. As we know, the Guardians movies are known for their soundtracks. The first Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack, Awesome Mix Volume 1, I think might be the biggest selling soundtrack of all time. Like, it was super successful because the music in James Gunn movies, especially in this trilogy, are just so intertwined with the story that's being told. And so in this movie, there's some really big acts that he leans on to tell the story of this movie. You have needle drops from Radiohead and Alice Cooper and Space Hog, Florence and the Machine, the Beastie Boys, Earth, Wind and Fire, Flaming Lips, Bruce Springsteen. Just the list goes on and on. I already know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask so that it's on the record. Do you have a favorite needle drop from this movie? And what was it about that particular moment that just stood out to you that made it so special in this movie?
Yeah, man. It's people know it's not even close, but when this fight sequence begins and they say, all right, Groot, we need you to bring the ship. And they start playing Reasons by Earth, Wind, and Fire. I almost lost it, y'all. I almost lost it. It's funny because at that point in time, I was like, this is one of the greatest Marvel movies I've ever seen. I knew there's something about that moment that we had, first and foremost, how often do you hear Earth, Wind, and Fire in anything like that? Any kind of superhero, anything. The fact that they could get away with it is like, it doesn't make sense in any other project except like a movie like this, where James Gunn is just constantly dropping all kind of random songs that make sense. But when he dropped Reasons, bro, it just meant so much. One, I love Earth, Wind, and Fire. That's just, it is what it is. Reasons, I have a playlist called Genesis, y'all. Reasons is actually the first song I put on that playlist. It's crazy. Like, you can go back and see it in the history. It was like, nope, that's the first one you put on there. But the song starts out, now I'm craving your body. They were in the middle of the orgosphere.
Organic matter, which is
organic matter
composed of body parts and tissue.
Temperatures rising because they about to get into a fight. Like, it's just so much about the song that it means something completely different in the context of Guardians of the Galaxy in this movie than the actual song does. It was just so well done. It was genius. There's a reason it goes on as long as it does. Like, it's just, they just killed it, bro. It's by far, it's like, it's my favorite needle drop in Guardians history. Like, I heard it and I was just like, yeah, this is it. Like, he did it. Like, this is the shit, bro. So yeah, by far, Reasons, Earth, Wind, and Fire, man.
It was so well done. I think what I love the most about it is the fact that when they first play it, it's like a tease because they only play like 15, 20 seconds of it. Like, it's just, it's really low because the action is happening over the top of it. Drax gets shot by the security guard, by Nathan Fillion, and it looks like it's a really bad situation. It's like, oh shit, like we're kind of fearful. Like, is Drax gonna meet his demise right here? And then Groot finally arrives with the Bowie inside the orgosphere, and the music just kicks back in at full bass, blasting over those speakers. All the guards are like floating in the air because the gravity is, all of a sudden sucked out of the room. It was just brilliantly displayed and executed in this particular sequence. It was just so well done. There's some really good ones all throughout this movie, but I think the way that this was utilized and the way that it dropped in a particular sequence was just really, it's just a testament to I think the taste that James Gunn brings to these movies, because he doesn't just put a song in anything just for the sake of having it there. It's super intentional. It's always a very, very specific, no pun intended, reason why he has something incorporated throughout his movie. So I just loved what he did there with that one. Let's move on back to the characters though, and actually circle back to the big villain of this film and talk about the High Evolutionary, played by Chukwudi Iwuji, who has worked with James Gunn before. We recently saw him in the Peacemaker HBO Max original series. He was playing Myrn in that particular series. And I remember when that was on the air, we shortly thereafter found out that he was cast as the High Evolutionary in this particular project. And the High Evolutionary has a long history in Marvel Comics. And I know it's a character that diehard fans of Marvel Comics have been waiting on for a while, because he is one of the more prominent and powerful characters that we've ever seen. Actually made his debut in the 60s as a part of a Thor comic run, and has been incorporated all throughout different Marvel comics and storylines all throughout the years. But this is a very powerful and a very consequential character to just Marvel Comics and now subsequently the Marvel Cinematic Universe, just due to the nature that he is directly responsible for the creation of one of our most well-known and iconic film characters that we've gotten in this particular franchise. And he was there at the very beginning, intertwined with this relationship with Rocket, but also has higher ambitions to create a perfect society. That's what the High Evolutionary is all about in this particular movie. And he's willing to do pretty much anything to achieve that, so much so that he is committing so much animal cruelty and experimenting on different creatures in order to find whatever that perfect balance is. And we see that Rocket plays a very pivotal role in him discovering that. But before we talk about any more specifics, what did you think about not only seeing the High Evolutionary for the first time realized in live action, but the performance by Chukwudi Iwuji and what he brought to this particular character?
Chukwudi Iwuji, man, as a High Evolutionary might be one of the best Marvel villains we've ever gotten, particularly in a standalone film. I mean, the dude was killing it. I really liked him in Peacemaker. He did a tremendous work there too. But man, the way that he spoke to the people around him, and the acting beats he had was so good and so believable. What I like about the High Evolutionary in particular is I think when you can understand what a character is trying to do in a villain, it always elevates them a little bit. And in the moment where what was it, Peter Quill was like, I'm tired of somebody always trying to blah blah take over the universe or something. He's like, I'm not trying to take over the universe, I'm trying to perfect it. And I was like, dang, that makes a lot of sense with what you're doing, because he really is a scientist at the end of the day. And I was like, damn, that makes a lot of sense in what he's trying to do. But the way the way he talked to Rocket, the way that you have to perform, I think a lot of people kind of discount how good people are acting when it's not like a real being in front of somebody. The way he was able to speak to and talk to Rocket and hold, you know what I'm saying? That's like that's crazy. You know, that people are able to do that. A lot of people act off other actors, and a lot of times that's why the scene turns out so good. But a lot of times he had to act off whatever they use for Rocket, right, as a placeholder before they added CGI to it. That's really good. And my only small nitpick is by the end he became too yelly. I think for me, like, it worked out at first. It's like scene 2 when he's yelling, I was like, this dude is crazy. I love everything he's doing. But it was like scene 5 or really towards the end, he started yelling again. I was like, dang, man, you'd have to yell this time. Like, maybe add something else in it. That was one of the times I was like, ooh, we didn't need you to yell there because you were doing so good up until that point. But I think overall, the threat he brings, Counter Earth, how the experiments he was doing to Rocket, he really is a really good villain when you think about it and contextualize all the other villains we've gotten, especially because he does have a more humanoid face, right? He's not like Malekith, the dark elf, or something like that. You know what I'm saying? It's like, no, this dude has a human face. And once you see what Rocket does to him, it's like, oh man, you still got your shit rocked, bro. So I understand why you're so upset. But he has a little character arc within him too. Not necessarily character arc, but character, I would say, conflict, where he's like, I love this line. It's very simple, but he's like, I created you. Why didn't I think of that? I was like, of course, somebody who thinks they're God would think that, right? Why could Rocket come up with this solution to make these people that he couldn't, and he created Rocket? It makes so much sense that it's like, yeah, that does make sense why you'd be so upset at that. But especially somebody who's obsessed with perfection, why didn't he think of it first? Why did this little being that I made think of it before I did? And so I really like that obsession. I really like that he had to figure out why Rocket was as smart as he was, why he figured it out, why Rocket was capable of invention. I love all of those ideas. And I think the High Evolutionary, I really like how he conveyed them for the most part, because those are all really, I think, cool ideas when you're talking about a villain or mad scientists of that sort. It's like, damn, a lot of this makes sense. I like it. So yeah, I really liked his performance for the most part, man. I thought he helped bring the movie home, because there's been villains that don't feel like anything, but he felt like he was at least doing something, and I like that.
It's a pretty menacing performance because his methods, I don't think really anybody would agree with. And by the way, like, if you are prone to being sensitive about animal cruelty and seeing animals tortured in that way, this movie won't do anything to help that. Like, you are going to have a very tough time just because of the stuff that he is doing to these different creatures, because he's willing to go to any lengths in order to achieve the perfection that he's looking for. So he's really menacing in that regard, but at the same time, there is this morality play that's a part of it that is somewhat similar to Thanos. You know, Thanos wanted to bring balance to the universe, right? And at a certain point, you could think like, well, I can agree with you and understand your perspective, but you're trying to commit mass genocide. Can we do that differently? Same thing here with High Evolutionary. Yes, right. We all want to perfect society. Probably that would be nice, but what are the lengths you're willing to go to? Well, I don't want to do that, bro. I don't want to open up the skull of a creature to examine its brain, because that's going to leave a very traumatic and prolonged effect on that particular being. And so we saw that all throughout these things that he was trying to accomplish throughout this movie, it was all based on torturous acts, very, very cruel methods of achieving that stuff. And he saw it as, you know, maybe a lesser evil to achieve a greater good, which is an impossible bar to hit. He's never going to achieve that perfection. That's why he constantly failed. And I love the line that Rocket delivers at the end of the movie. Like, you didn't want to, you know, see things perfect. You just hated the way things are. And I think that speaks more to who he really is. The fact that no, it's not necessarily perfection you're going after. You just don't agree with how things have turned out. You know, he even talked about visiting Earth when he was talking to Quill, and he said, yeah, y'all have great music and great taste in literature, but yeah, there's a bunch of bigotry and crime, and I can do away with all of that and make it better. Well, no, you can't, bro. You built Counter Earth, and motherfuckers were still getting mugged on the street and selling drugs, beating each other's asses. You got a octopus drug dealer in an alleyway selling meth. It's like, what do you think you can really do and really achieve here? Like, it's a warped sense of you know, sort of I guess justice to a certain extent, but also this self-righteous approach that he brings to everything. Because initially it's like, okay, perfect society, maybe he is onto something, maybe he does know something, even though you're seeing him do this heinous shit. But then by the end of it, it's like, no, you're kind of full of shit, my guy. Like, you don't really have the keys to the kingdom, because look around you, Counter Earth is not what you think it is. And I have to agree too, just with the performance, Chukwudi Iwuji was great. I thought he did a really terrific job. By the end of it, was screaming entirely too much. It just became a little bit over maniacal, very, very more traditional villain. There's that one part at the end where he's like, there is no God. That's why I stepped in. And it's like, all right, dial it back a little bit. Just bring it back. You know, we don't got to go all the way there. But by far, it was really, really great to see. I do want to talk about Counter Earth, because that is a big focal point of this. And that's the third big action set piece, sort of takes place in the middle of the movie towards the end of Act 2. We get to see what Counter Earth looks like. We get to see them arrive on Counter Earth, and you see all of these creatures that are now peaceful. They can be peaceful beings based off of, you know, sort of a pre-existence of being a creature, you know, some sort of animalistic species. Some people are walking around with pig snouts, or they have bunny ears. Like, it's really, really weird things, a real weird combination of things. But people have jobs. You know, there's a mailman. People are mowing their lawns. There was a panda bear literally mowing a lawn. I never thought I would see that, but it was happening all throughout this movie. So to a certain extent, he was able to achieve what he was looking for. But as we found out just a few mere minutes later, as you drive throughout Counter Earth, it's plagued by the same difficulties that we deal with in our own society. That there's going to be bad apples. There's going to be people, based on the circumstances and how they're raised and how they're brought up, they're going to succumb to just the environment around them, and ultimately retreat and revert back to maybe what's the closest and most accessible thing to them. And that might be drugs, that might be violence, whatever the case may be. What did you think about just the realization of seeing Counter Earth here? That is something that was definitely pulled from the comics and incorporated and made a very focal story point here. But what did you think about just the realization of it on the big screen?
Man, it's very well done. I think that they have to go through all these costumes. Yeah, I'm sure it was fun to be like an extra on Counter Earth and be wearing this random animal costume. I have a feeling that was like, it had to be some of the funniest moments on set, like being your colleague is a panda and another colleague is like some random, I don't know, some stuff evolved and didn't even look like an animal anymore. It looked like something else. Like even the main lady we get, I was like, is that a deer? I didn't know what she was for a while there. I was like, what is this woman? Because her ears are really big, but she didn't feel like a rabbit. You know what I'm saying? I was like, I don't know what this woman is, but it's still cool to look at. It felt very just as much as James Gunn always, you know, says he loves Star Wars and Star Wars is a big part of Guardians. It felt very tricky when you see these people, right? Like, it is what it is. And I thought, I just thought it was cool. It felt very like something that would happen in a comic book. And that is almost what I love the most about it. It was like, damn, what is going on? This is literally Earth habited by animal looking people, but it's just like the Earth that we know. Am I watching something else? Am I watching a TV show about, I don't know, some weird sci-fi TV show? So it was really cool, I think, to see the world realize something. I think that's so interesting is the High Evolutionary said he had made two other civilizations, right? One of them being the Sovereign. And the whole time I'm like, what is wrong with the Sovereign? Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, wait a second, because they do call themselves like perfect beings or something like that, right? And I'm like, dang, I wish they would tell me what's wrong. But then when you see, I think, the people of Counter Earth, part of me even thinks that nothing necessarily is super wrong with the Sovereign as a nation. Sure, I'm sure he found something wrong with them, but I think low-key he was like, Earth is kind of cool. You know what I'm saying? I think he was like, dang, Earth is tight, and animals are also kind of cool. Let me make an Earth with animals on it. I know he's trying to do something else, but sometimes it felt that simple. And so when I seen Counter Earth, I was like, this dude just likes animals and he likes Earth, and he just wants to see what it looks like. Eventually, of course, he blows up the planet or kills all these people, which was, again, also kind of surprising for a Marvel film, seeing this many people get exploded.
More mass genocide. Yeah,
definitely more. I was like, man, even when Thanos snaps people, at least it's like dust. You know what I'm saying? In this
it's humane,
movie,
right? It's a little bit.
It's
okay,
a little
we'll
bit,
peacefully go out.
Hey, in this movie, bro, it was like explosion. It was like
hellfire and brimstone everywhere.
Because again, we got accustomed to humanoid animals. We're so accustomed to Rocket, right? And if these people are not necessarily a reflection of Rocket per se, but they're humanoid animals too. That's what they are. Now they're exploding. Wow. I don't know how we got here. This is insane. But of course I liked it though, right? Because it is more violent and it does hit you a little bit more in the heart when you see that first explosion happen. It's like a little girl in the frame or something next. I was like, oh my God. Like, what is this where we're going? So yeah, I love the depiction of Counter Earth. I love the idea how comic booky it is. But man, it got dark on that planet, boy. It was crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think to that point about just how Counter Earth ultimately perished in this movie, James Gunn is really good at maintaining stakes. He always knows how to raise the stakes of a story and make all the stuff that occurs consequential. Like nothing is accidental. Nothing is to be taken lightly. Like people's lives are on the line. And so to see just the probably millions and millions of countless lives that ultimately perished because he decided to self-destruct Counter Earth because it wasn't perfect enough was kind of crazy to see. Like you said, you don't see it coming. One point I forgot to mention about Gamora as it relates to the stakes piece is the fact that her death in Infinity War still has its stakes because this Gamora is not the Gamora that we knew. And again, I think James Gunn always goes back to and finds a way to bring that a part of his stories, because killing Gamora in that movie probably was not his decision. I think the Russos approached him and said, this is what we want to do. This is what we're thinking. I'm sure he signed off on it and ultimately agreed to do it. He even spoke about possibly killing off Gamora in Volume 2. So she was likely to meet her end at some point, but then to take that story point and still find a way to make it into something. And then with this Counter Earth stuff, to all of a sudden not just make it a place that's just going to be around. It's like, no, we're going to take it off the table now. It's going to be completely wiped off because the High Evolutionary is just not satisfied with it. I'm convinced, though, that in the High Evolutionary's trip to Earth, our Earth, he tried drugs, because how else did drugs make it to Counter Earth? How else would they know what meth is? The High Evolutionary was on that shit when he came to Earth, man. He probably had the finest white. He had the finest cocaine. He probably tried crack. He probably tried meth and LSD, all the shits. Because
how else on there?
How else would they know? And he was like, well, maybe this could be a benefit to Counter Earth. There could be another ecosystem, another financial gain for the people of Counter Earth, because there's no way they would know about drugs. I mean, maybe somebody could just like scientifically go in a lab and start putting shit together and just trying stuff out. But I just wonder, like, anything that's a part of Counter Earth has to somehow come from his influence, right? Like it has to come from his hand, because he is in essence like being their god, right? And so if God is creating this new society, then my guy, you were on that shit when you were on Earth, which, hey, get it how you live. I don't blame him. But I do want to also talk about some other characters. You mentioned the Sovereign. We should talk about Will Poulter coming in here as Adam Warlock, who was a much anticipated character that we were hoping to see. They teased out Adam Warlock at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, really just due to the existence of Aisha, who was leading the Sovereign in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. She was sort of the B-level villain in that movie, created Warlock and designed him to be the perfect specimen, to be the perfect being. And we find out at the top of this movie that the High Evolutionary did not want to wait anymore. He wanted to unleash Warlock and basically have him go carry out that mission to retrieve Rocket. But Adam Warlock is still pretty much a baby, even though he looks like a grown man, a fully grown man. He's just so young in his development, so he doesn't pick up social cues. He doesn't really know how to handle certain situations, especially under high pressure. And so we get to see how that all comes to fruition with the reemergence of Aisha, but then also the introduction of Adam Warlock in this movie. What did you think about them as a unit? I mean, we didn't get a ton of Adam Warlock. We certainly didn't see as much of him as I think people had anticipated and had hoped for, but at least out of what we saw and just how they utilized him and deployed him throughout the movie, what did you think about him, and also just a relationship with his his mother, who is in fact Aisha.
Yeah, man, it was fine. It was fine. Watching it, I think will always be weird. Seeing Adam Warlock post Infinity War will always throw me off. Like knowing the original Infinity War story with Adam Warlock, he usually faces Thanos. You know what I'm saying? And there's no Thanos. So when he pops up, of course I was looking forward to Will Poulter being Adam Warlock, but there's still part of me I was like, okay, but now what? Like, there's no Thanos. Where are we going? Of course, part of me, I think also I did understand that there was more for Adam Warlock to do, as the video game showed us too, right? There's no Thanos in the video game, but Adam Warlock is very much part of that video game. And they do things with him that do feel important. And so seeing him here, man, I was just excited to see him. I wanted to see what Will Poulter brought to the table. He's such a good actor. But yeah, he does get the back seat. It just is what it is about the movie. He gets the back seat. And I think part of that is, again, for a long time, the MCU has thrived off of source material. And now it's like, okay, James Gunn clearly has his idea, right, of what he needs this Guardians movie to be. But now 6 years has passed. And there's no Adam Warlock. We see Adam Warlock get teased at the end of Guardians 2. He's not in any of the Endgame or any of the final Avengers films. What are we doing with this character? Not only that, this is the last Guardians movie. What are we doing with Adam Warlock? I feel like his presence felt more like we have to include him. We talked about him at the end of Guardians 2, more than it felt like, let's introduce this character and give him things to do, give him a character arc, that's what it felt more like. It felt more like we need to check this box off and we're going to just do it as best as we can, given the situation. That's what he felt like to me as a character in the movie. And that's fine. I wasn't too mad at it, but I do, again, part of me does wish, like, dang, I wish we got this dude. Like, I wish he actually came out in Guardians 2 versus what we got here. You know what I'm saying? That he could have been part of the Infinity Saga. He would be more important in a story somewhere or doing something else. But yeah, I don't know, man. That's just how we felt. I think overall they will do something else with him, because I don't know if it's a spoiler alert, because they could do nothing with him low-key if they really want to. But Adam Warlock also has, what's his name? Magus, who is
Magus, I think, yeah.
Magus, who was like his future self, who was way more powerful than him. Adam Warlock introduces one of the most powerful people in the MCU. That's a villain in their pocket. Like, and again, a lot of people don't know that yet, but that's like a really big villain in their pocket. So I think that's another reason it's like, okay, let's include him. We now have Magus in our pocket because Adam Warlock is a thing now. I'm okay with that too. And so, yeah, it's kind of unfortunate that he had to get the backseat like that, but it was fine. He had funny moments. I like that he had the little dog thing. I don't know what that thing was. To this day,
was it a chia pet? Was it a Furby? Was it?
They
a
didn't
dog?
give it a name or nothing. It kind of looked like, what is it? Domos, like that brown looking.
Oh yeah.
Whatever. It looked crazy, man. It definitely looked like, what's the name of the animal from Shang-Chi?
Oh my God. Wait, it actually does look like that a lot. It looks a lot like that same.
Just like how it's like a ball of fur kind of type
furry
thing.
Face.
Just a big furry thing. And I was like, hey, what is this thing? Does anybody know what this is? I thought it was crazy. Which I have to add. Oh my God, Adam Warlock, when he smoked old boy in that chair.
Oh, he disintegrated him completely. That was amazing.
Crazy. 10 out of 10. It actually reminded me of Ragnarok when Grandmaster stabbed old boy. You've been purged from life and stabbed him. It reminded me of the exact same thing. I was like, is he about to disintegrate this kid? And he does. And it makes so much sense. So like, I love that about Adam Warlock though. Like they showed his power. I thought that was a good thing they did about Adam Warlock. They showed how he could just go into space and get Peter Quill. They showed how he could just fuck up the Guardians on a whim. You know what I'm saying? I like that about it. I just wish he had more to do. I'm not too mad about it. It's just unfortunate, and it is what it is. But we'll see what they do with him in the future.
Yeah, I think James Gunn, in listening to him talk, he has been discussing the inclusion of Adam Warlock since the first Guardians movie, but they just couldn't find the right time, opportunity, and place until it ultimately resulted in that post-credit sequence. But even then, it felt like, to what you just said, it felt like that they had to set this thing up and pay it off somehow, but almost maybe in the development of this film, they just realized that it was not the direction that they wanted to go ultimately in terms of making him a focal point. And once we started to see the marketing and get more info about this movie, I always knew that Adam Warlock was going to be essentially the hired gun on behalf of the High Evolutionary. Like, he is super powerful, and High Evolutionary was going to serve as the primary villain. But even then, even with that sort of shape within this movie, he doesn't do terribly much. And I think a part of the reason for that is because Marvel has still not figured out, in terms of their live action movies, they haven't figured out how to deploy these incredibly powerful characters that are damn near OP. Cannot be defeated. They're OP. Like, you don't really know what to do with them. That's why we saw the Russos almost kind of neuter the Hulk in those Avengers movies, because the Hulk is super powerful. And what they did was, basically in Infinity War, we got no Hulk. We just got Banner. And Endgame, we got Smart Hulk, who's just like sophisticated and can be a scientist and a quote unquote unkillable monster, but he's not really, because he has a heart now, whatever. Like, I think that they have to figure out just how to make this believable and maintain the stakes of all the characters that are involved, but do so in a way that still remains faithful to how powerful a being could be. Because we do get those moments of power where he disintegrates a guy. Aisha's like, show him we mean business. And his idea of business is like completely killing and just wiping this guy off the face of the earth. Or when he just like grabs the head of War Pig.
Oh yeah.
War Pig like shifts to the left, and it all of a sudden, like, the whole fucking head is off, just completely decapitated. Crazy. It's like, wow, yeah, you are super powerful. So I just don't know if they figured out a way to just make it make sense within the context of these movies. But Will Poulter is really good. I love what he did, the comedic stuff and the balance he brought there between being intimidating but also having that sense of humor was really, really good stuff. And just also the interplay that him and Elizabeth Debicki had as his mother. She's trying to raise him in the best way that she knows how, but she's also, again, acting on behalf of the High Evolutionary. So they're both just kind of in the shit and don't really know how to handle it. But we do get some stakes for Adam Warlock, because Aisha does get killed. As Counter-Earth is exploding and blowing up, he tries to save her. He's unable to do so. So that gives him a little bit more purpose. So I am curious to see how that can influence and pay off for him in the future, because we know by the end of this, he does become heroic and joins up with the Guardians team, which we'll talk about. I do want to quickly mention, before we move on to any other characters or any other set pieces, Counter-Earth brought us a very special moment. And that is the first F-bomb in Marvel Cinematic Universe history. The first time ever in an MCU movie, probably the first time ever in a Disney movie. I would have to fact check that, but we got an F-bomb in this movie. And it was expertly utilized by Peter Quill. Not a huge moment, but definitely something that I know I was looking forward to seeing and seeing how they were going to deploy it. Basically, Quill on Counter-Earth finds a car in the driveway of the people that he goes to visit to find out more information about the whereabouts of the High Evolutionary. They get into the car. Quill doesn't know how to drive because he left Earth when he was 8, but he does recognize the car. He does know how to at least get inside of a car. Nebula, on the other hand, she doesn't know what the hell she's doing. She's trying to open the door, having all sorts of problems. She's pushing the keyhole. It's not working. Finally, Quill's like, open the fucking door. And I remember the theater just erupting in applause. It was a great moment. It was really well utilized on the part of James Gunn. Just kudos to him for including that in. But we don't have to spend a ton of time there. But what did you think about that? Just getting the first F-bomb ever in the MCU.
I actually think it's bigger than what it seems, because Deadpool's coming, Blade is coming, all these darker properties are now on the precipice. Not only that F-bomb, but the violence of this that we talk about, the horror of this movie that we talk about. I think it's all very important. We spoke about in our preliminary episode for Guardians how everything after Guardians was a galactic adventure between Doctor Strange and Captain Marvel. And I'm very curious if this movie just broke some of that same ground. You know what I mean? After watching this movie, will Blade get even darker potentially than it was supposed to be in the first place? Is Deadpool 3, are the F-bombs going to fly as we hoped they would to begin with? You know what I mean? I really hope and think that this might have opened a door. It felt like a simple moment right there that we all loved. I loved it. I thought it was a great moment. I was one of the people cheering, like, yes, that was great. But it could mean more for the future, and I think that's dope. As small as that is, I think it might have some payoff, man. So we'll have to see.
It's a funny story online. You can go find it, where James Gunn was talking about including an F-bomb in the script. And obviously when Kevin Feige reads the script, he's like, you know, James, you don't really want to be the first filmmaker with Marvel who's known for dropping an F-bomb in a movie. And James Gunn is like, Do you know who I am? I absolutely want to be that guy that introduces the first F-bomb. And it's like, yeah, have you seen any of James Gunn's movies? Like,
Exactly.
the dude is very vulgar, very inappropriate. Even in the Guardians movies, which have been PG-13, he knows how to incorporate some real dark humor, some real black comedy all throughout his films, and it's done so in a way that it walks that line. It's like you can get what he's insinuating, but he doesn't always have to say it exactly or spell it out for you. You can kind of see where it's going, and that's just the brilliance of his writing. So love seeing that moment come to life. It was really great, and hopefully will have some bigger implications, because Deadpool, I need like 350 F-bombs in that movie.
All of them. Like South Park numbers.
We just need that for sure. Let's keep it pushing, get back to the Guardians team, the core Guardians team, which means we should talk about Dave Bautista coming back as Drax. Now, Dave Bautista has made it very, very clear this is the last time he's playing this character. He does not intend to come back. One of the big revelations of this movie, which I know we'll circle back to, none of the Guardians die. And so I think we came into this movie thinking like, oh, well, maybe Drax, he meets his end. Maybe this is the end of the road for him if Dave Bautista seems so confident that he will no longer suit up as Drax. But it does turn out to be a little bit more of a happy ending. But beyond him finally wanting to retire in the role, I think what I ultimately realized about Drax in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is that this was the Drax that I fell in love with in the first movie, the particular character, just the way that he's utilized and the way that the script is catered towards him, and it doesn't make him necessarily look like a doofus, because I think sometimes in the hands of other filmmakers, Drax has been sort of reduced down to being a dumbass, and they allude to that in this movie. Like, we hear Nebula call him a dumbass multiple times, but I think that there's a lot more to him than that, right? And I think that some other filmmakers previously haven't totally quite gotten that. Like, I think about Infinity War, when he's on the ship, he's watching Quill and Gamora make out, and he's eating Zarg nuts, and he's just standing there, and all of a sudden he's like, I'm invisible, you can't see me, I'm so still that you can't notice my movements. And I always thought, like, I don't know if that really speaks to the humor that's within Drax. Like, yes, he's literal, but he's not an idiot per se. Like, I just didn't feel like that moment totally landed. And I think we got back to that in this movie, where like he's completely literal, he doesn't really understand analogies and metaphors, and he's also kind of a prick because he thinks he's more important than he really is. Like, the entire movie, he's like, I'm your second best friend, Quill. Like, second best. Anytime he references Rocket, he's like second best, right? So I just love the way that Dave Bautista, sort of reintroduced us to the Drax that I think was kind of perfected in that first movie and elevated in the second movie, and sort of bringing that back full circle. And then just also the purpose that he had too. There was a lot of purpose to Drax in this movie, and the arc that he had as well, in terms of the fatherhood element, relating to children, all that stuff. But what did you think about Dave Bautista coming back as Drax here and what he brought to the movie?
Yeah, man, I loved everything he was doing here. You kind of talk about how just the how different he is in this movie, man. How he's kind of back to the literal, not, like you said, not necessarily dumbass. And I really like what I think Dave Bautista was doing here, man, because Drax is I think sometimes he's supposed to be like so understandable because he's so literal that it makes him almost completely like you don't know what he's talking about, because that's how literal he is sometimes. And I thought he shined through with any scene that he was in. Him and Mantis, who we'll talk about, here in a sec, but they just have such good chemistry. It's crazy. And I love how intentional James Gunn was with putting them together again. He was like, oh, you got a glimpse in the Christmas special? Y'all got to do this again. There's no way. We have to, I'm like, we got to put this in the movie as well. And they do that, and it has such a good payoff by the end of it. I mean, Drax is crying, knowing that Mantis is going away. I was like, this is so good. Like, yeah, that's exactly, I think, the beat he will have. Not only that, Drax feels like a low-key, the way his story is, Drax is Gore the God Butcher with a personality. You know what I'm saying? Like, the same thing low-key happened to him. Like, he lost his wife, he lost his kid. But like, Drax has more to him, and I love that they can continue to explore that. And by the end of it, or the middle of it, he's like talking to these little kids that nobody else can talk to. And that's the piece where I was like, yeah, this shit is tight, because you're telling me Mantis, the translating goddess of the world, who Ego made her to translate and put them to sleep. That's what Mantis was supposed to do. She doesn't know what language these kids are speaking. Nebula, who's also traveled, I'm sure she knows tons of languages too, doesn't know what. Drax is like, you never asked me if I knew the language. And a lot of people in Nebula were like, you got to be fucking kidding me, right? But there's like part of that that's like, that shit kind of real though. Like, you never asked me if I knew the language because you automatically assumed, which I love that. I love that people automatically assume who Drax is. And then he had a whole arc where it's like, well, you never asked who I really was. And then he shows you. I love that, man. And I love the realization. She said you were meant to be a dad. I was but I thought that was a dope like way to think about it. I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, Drax the Destroyer, I don't know. There's just more to him than meets the eye, and I love that they harp on that a little bit in the moments that we see with him. And I thought that was really cool. So yeah, between him and the chemistry he has with Mantis, tremendous job from Dave Bautista as always. No surprises there, man. Of course, a little sad we won't see him again. I think in that capacity, but it is what it is. You know, everything comes to an end. Gamora said she ain't come, or Zoe Saldana said she ain't coming back either. So there's something about the way in which the characters exit that it feels like they didn't have to die. And I love that too, because I think coming into this movie, we all were expecting somebody. You could have asked me who died. I would have gave you an answer. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I think this person's going to die. I think we all had known James Gunn to have high enough stakes to kill somebody off. And then this movie, they're like, it's like he played off of that. He was like, ha, gotcha. Nobody's going to die, but they are going to go their separate ways in a different kind of way. And I really like that conclusion, the way he did that.
Yeah, certainly. Dave Bautista is just so incredible. He just knows this character so well. And I love the candor of Dave Bautista in media and press, not only to say, I'm done, I'm retiring after this. So the guy to have the wherewithal and the self-awareness to say, I don't really want to do this anymore. I don't want to have to like kill my body and eat the most healthy shit all the time to look as physically fit as I have to play this role. Like he even wore a sleeveless hoodie this entire movie because he's probably like, bro, I'm tired of eating 36,000 calories a fucking week or whatever it might be to maintain that type of diet, you know? And I love that he can just be candid about that. And then also can be candid about his experience as a whole playing Drax and sort of calling out that it hasn't always been pleasurable for him. There have been experiences where he's like, you know, I didn't really like how Drax was treated in that movie. I didn't really like what he brought to this particular project or whatever the case may be. And it just feels like, again, that we go back to a really self-aware Drax, but also the Drax that can have all the humor that you expect, because he has some of the funniest lines throughout the movie. I loved earlier in the film when we were talking about the Orgosphere and everybody's mad at Mantis because all their suits go out through the compactor in space. And he's like, oh, are we pretending to be angry again? Mantis, you asshole. And he just does it just to you know, get on her nerves. He has so many good moments and good lines like that. And then you couple that with the fact that he does have a really, really emotional pull throughout this film where we get to see his relationship with children, which, by the way, we should mention that, speaking to the darkness of this movie, there's a whole child trafficking element that's embedded in this story. Like, we don't just talk about animal cruelty. The High Evolutionary has kidnapped children because he's probably about to experiment on them next to figure out this combination of parts and pieces to create this perfect society. And thankfully for Drax, he can be that guy that can communicate with them and speak their language. And I remember watching it at first thinking like, oh, I don't know if we needed this. I don't know if we needed the children in this, but then realizing by the end of it, like, that's to serve the story of Drax, to say, like, you are a great father figure. You can be a great father figure to these children if they're going to, you know, sort of now be citizens of nowhere. You can show them the way. You can raise them and guide them and be very gentle and sensitive with them, because I'm sure he was that way with his own daughter. And so now he's found a new purpose as well. So Dave Bautista is just incredible, man. He has just shown time and time again why he's the man. He's really the man. And I'm so excited for everything he's going to do in the future, because he's just so talented and he can really pull anything off. The fact that he was able to do this for so long while also still exploring other more dramatic roles, working with other directors like that's going to mean really good stuff for him. Let's move on and talk about Mantis, because she also plays equally as much of an important role here. We did find out in the holiday special that Mantis and Quill are siblings. They are brother and sister. That was pretty much the main storyline for that particular special. So by the time we get to this movie, they don't spend a ton of time talking about that. They just briefly mention it. So if you didn't see the holiday special, it's like, oh, I didn't know that, but they are related. But what I loved about what Pom Clemente have brought to the role is that she's starting to actually act like that now. She's starting to become more sisterly to Peter. And I think that a lot of her purpose throughout this movie is kind of just counseling him. We saw earlier in the movie when she's talking to him about his experience on Earth and like, why didn't you ever go back, Peter? Didn't you ever get curious about your grandfather and how you left him and whether or not he's still alive? And Peter's like, he's like 90. People on Earth die when they're like 50. And she's very surprised by that. And she's also just trying to help him along the way. And she gives him that really perfect analogy about swimming and lily pads. Like that was also extremely important for Peter's development and his arc throughout this movie. So I just love that she became more of a sister. What did you think about seeing Palm Clemente, sort of take on that mantle to become a sibling to Peter and to try to counsel him and to maybe steer him in a different path that he maybe, saw for himself at this particular time?
It actually made me sad by the end. When she says, when Peter says he's leaving, right, and she says, oh, I am too, part of me thought it was together. Part of me was like, oh, maybe they're going to, and then you see her take off with the abelisks or whatever they're called, and I was like, oh, they're not going together. That's a little sad because I feel like they just figured out their relationship, right? And it's like, damn, y'all leaving already? Like, ain't your sister? It's been like, you know what I'm saying? For us, it's been what, 5 months? Christmas special happened 5 months ago. Like y'all already splitting up.
It's like they go to separate colleges almost, like one goes to NYU, one goes across the country to UCLA or something.
It's crazy because I seen a scenario where of course we figure out Star-Lord's coming back, whatever capacity, but I seen a scenario where I don't know, maybe it's like the brother and sister adventure of Star-Lord and Mantis, right? Because I actually really like Mantis. Like, I think she's a really, really good character. I don't think people see her in the same light I see her in, but she's Palm, however you say her name, Clementif, is killing it. She really is going crazy, I think, in this role. And I wouldn't mind seeing more of her. I really wouldn't, especially she wasn't even part of the first Guardians. You know what I mean? And it's like, dang, do we have to say about her already? Like, can we get at least one more with her too? Kind of type thing. And so, yeah, man, I really like the work she's doing. I love that she did become more of a sister to Peter Quill, especially, it's funny, she felt like she had to speak through Drax though. And I think that's part of like a small disconnect they have because they are so new, right? She doesn't want to overstep that bounds in some ways. Like, oh, Drax, you've known him more. I need you to say these things to Peter. You know what I'm saying? I don't know why she chose him out of all people. She should have gave it to like Groot or somebody. Well,
Drax does he tries to level with Peter a lot. I remember in the last movie talking about dancing, like, only idiots dance and stuff like that. And he's trying to communicate. He's often like trying to have these really serious conversations, but they never turn out serious because Drax is so literal and he just says such wild, outlandish shit. So maybe she saw that and thought like, oh, perhaps you can get through to him, but no, not really.
Yeah, she was like, maybe you can get through to him. This is your chance. And it's interesting because he does, but it's I guess by the end of it though, at least he sees that Mantis was behind it, and that love and the care was there, and to say it in some form or fashion. So I really do like that about it, man. I just hope that we get more of it. It's like, oh, we find out they're brother and sister, but now what? And we don't get that much. We don't get like an embrace, even at the end, they just walk away. I'm like, damn. She said she did her little and the obelisk come on. I'm like, y'all not gonna hug?
I'm like, are we making the stallion right now? This little bird call? Like, what are we doing? But yeah, they just walk off real quick.
I was like, damn, y'all, that's your sibling, bro. Like, say goodbye. Like, you know what I'm saying? And again, my hope is just that they see each other at some point in time, whatever plans that they have for Star-Lord in the future. I hope, even though it just said Star-Lord, I hope that like we get surprised by seeing Mantis somehow. I think Star-Lord is like of course he's coming. I'm hoping Mantis is like oh shit, she made a cameo at this random time that we didn't expect. That's my new hope after seeing the way everything went down, man. So yeah, I really love the work she's doing. I think Mantis is tremendous. Palm Clementif, she's tremendous, man. I think she's really good.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, she has really good comedic timing and also has really emotional and heavy beats too. Like you just get all sorts of shades and colors with her character. And you never know what to expect with Mantis. Like one moment she's saying something super profound and it's like, wow, you are important. You are a part of the family. Even when she's able to just communicate with the obelisks and calm them down and say like, they don't want to eat us. They eat batteries. Like we just have to connect with them because they're probably afraid of us more than we are of them. And so has a super important role, but then can still just do like funny shit. Like again, sort of be sisterly to Peter when they are on the Orgosphere at first. And Peter is trying to reconnect with Gamora, and he transmits over to her sound wave, at least her frequency in the suit. And in the background, you don't see it, but I'm sure that you can think like Mantis is like the one, like, I should probably interject here and tell him that we can all hear him. Drax isn't going to do it because he's just going to sit there and listen to him embarrass himself. And Nebula is like, I just thought you were going to reach a place where you were going to finally stop. And so Mantis is finally like, I should say something now.
I gotta add, bro, the whole orgosphere sequence when they're in space, Mantis is constantly doing flips like the whole time to the bottom. I just thought that was funny. It was so like her character to be like that aloof, I guess is the word, because she may be like super smart. Emotional intelligence is literally her thing, but she's literally in the background doing flips the entire. I just thought that was a really funny like addition to her character, especially Gamora's like flying straight without moving like this, and this girl's in the back doing flips. I was like, this makes so much sense for her. It's small, but I loved it.
No, she was really kind of stealing the movie at that particular point. The whole orgosphere stuff from that, like when they are, trying to approach the orgosphere and they're using the gravity suits and she's flipping, to all the way when they're on the inside and she's fucking goofing around with Drax, or even when they finally decide to fight, Drax is like, we should fight, like, let's go. And she starts to use her mind control powers on all the guards. She tells one to unleash violent rage, and then the other guy, she's like, dance. And dude is just like fucking killing it on the side. He's going in while bullets are flying, lasers are everywhere. It's the funniest shit ever.
It's so funny.
I just love how she can just like use that at any moment. Like she could be very manipulative with it, but then also sometimes it's a little bit more tender. Like when she finally tells Drax and stands up for him against Nebula, she's like, yeah, he is a dumbass, but at least he loves himself. At least he knows who he is. Just a great moment. And Drax is like, I don't know if I appreciate this. Do you really think I'm a dumbass? And she's like, you know what? Let's just forget that moment. Just remember the good stuff. And so she got good timing. She knows how to use her powers when it's important and when it makes sense. And so, yeah, Palm Clementiev, I think she will be back, though. I think the reason we see her in the way that she does, because I agree that stuff moved a little bit too fast. I feel like she'll be back, probably even as an Avenger. Like, I would not be surprised if we see her circle back
with
and
the
up. That would be incredible, and I think that she would be so well utilized in that capacity, again, as a part of another team, whether it's with Peter or whether it's with like a larger Avengers team in a future movie. So can't wait to see the future for Mantis and Palm Clementiev. Let's move on and talk about Karen Gillan as Nebula, who I would say has probably been giving the best stealth performances in all of these movies from the very beginning.
I agree.
He is low-key kind of the MVP of not only the Guardians franchise, but any project she's been a part of because of her extreme importance to the overarching story. Not only, of course, in Avengers Infinity War with their relationship to Thanos, but of course, in Avengers Endgame, her playing a dual role, like many of the characters had to do, but she had to do so to a different degree, playing just two completely different iterations of her, to now coming into this movie and taking on an entirely new shape altogether, is a full-fledged member of the Guardians of the Galaxy and has grown and evolved from where we saw her in the first one. I mean, in the first one, very angry, very furious at her sister, very much a henchman carrying out plans, to now is a hero and an Avenger and a Guardian of the Galaxy, and really living an entirely different purpose than I think a lot of us expected her to. What did you think about Karen Gillan, coming back here and being a part of this, really from the get-go? She was in that first movie and has been so integral to just like where we see her now and just that evolution with her character.
Talk about killing it, man. I mean, like you said, it's stealth in some ways just because she's not ever the face, nor does nobody talk about Guardians and be like, that Nebula is my favorite character. But when you really sit down, I think especially as long and as much as we have, if we've watched these movies over and over, man, and you can see the little things she does and the growth that she has. It's crazy, man. And of course, Karen Gillan's a lot of it, but James Gunn is killing it too. Like it's really impressive when you look at it, man. And she is one of the people who has a really dark story. She is one of the people that's like also a part of almost everything, right? As much as we talk about how important Gamora is, Nebula really is kind of the other side to that coin, often the same side of the coin, to be honest, when they're on the same side. But it's really crazy, man. And it's really impressive that she's able to pull off some of the things she does. And I just really enjoy her. I enjoy her performances. I even said at the top of this, man, like, you really want to talk about the heart of a movie. Low key, I was like, she might be the heart because, again, even by the end, she's like, I gotta watch Nowhere. And I even felt that from the beginning when she's carrying Star-Lord. I'm like, she kind of feels like the mayor of the town. You know what I mean? She feels like she may feel like she's in the background a little bit, but she, in that moment, she was leading the Guardians at that point in time. She's like, let's go she's the one giving everybody shish kebab. She's the one, again, that has Star-Lord in her hand. She's
Rocket even thought at the end that she was going to be captain. He was like,
that she was going to do it.
Yeah, are you going to do it now? She's like, no.
She said, no, I got to stay here and care about Nowhere and have the home that I never had. I was like, this is a character arc for your ass. Like, if you want to really study character arc, Nebula has done it. She did it. Like, she got tortured by her father because she kept losing to her sister, came back, became a guardian of the galaxy. She tried to kill her sister several times, failed, but she failed because there's still some kind of heart within her. You know what I'm saying? Now she's leading a planet that flies and has children and animals, and that's crazy to me. You know what I'm saying? She went from being tortured to that. That's a character arc, man. Again, the way her performance comes through is so good. I'll never forget the moment that she finds out Rocket is okay. And she hears Rocket's voice, and she kind of just like breaks down for a second. And Mantis is looking at her like, damn. And it makes sense. They were the only two people alive. You know what I'm saying? They were the only two Guardians in Endgame and Infinity War. Of course she would feel that way about Rocket.
Yeah.
Of course she would feel that way about Rocket. That is in that moment when everyone gets snapped, that becomes her family. That's the closest thing she has. Gamora is dead. Everybody else got snapped. It was just her and Rocket for a long time. So, of course, when she hears Rocket is okay, she has that reaction because you could even see it a little bit of her performance. But even when she hears Rocket is sick or something's wrong with him, it's affecting her. It really, like, Nebula is on a mission because I had, beyond Nebula trying to kill Gamora, I almost had never seen her that motivated. You know what I'm saying? Of course, there was always small motivations here and there, but I almost never seen her like, oh no, we gotta go do this thing. Like, she's in a suit in the orgosphere trying to save somebody. You would have never seen the old Nebula do that. So yeah, I really love that character arc. Karen Gillan was just killing it. I love the small details between her and the way she treats Rocket in that moment, man. It was just all well done to me, man. I think she's really good.
I just really 10 out of 10 from her development of this character and really crafting it and bringing it to life and doing something really different every single time. I mean, when you see Nebula across all of these films, it's never the same performance twice. You talk about the relationship with Rocket. They slightly alluded to it even in the holiday special when she gifts him Bucky's arm as a present. Like, she knew Rocket well enough that he really wanted that arm, and so she found a way to get him that goddamn arm. The fact that she's giving out presents even at this stage in her life, it's like, wow, you have really come and made a complete 180 from who you used to be. And I think it just speaks to the fact that when Nebula loves, she loves really, really hard. Like, that's the thing that we don't really notice about her that's not explicit, but it's there if you pay attention to it. She loves who she loves with her entire heart. There's even the moment earlier in the movie when Gamora is verbally unleashing on Quill. She's like, I don't give a shit about your Gamora. That's not who I am. And as you said, she goes to punch him. It's a very, very emotional and risky moment. Nebula steps in and Gamora's like, you're going to choose him? I'm family. And she's like, so is he. Like, y'all ain't no different. Y'all are both family. I'm stepping in on his behalf. And I just love that all these different roles she's occupying. It just speaks to her entire journey. You know, she's a protector, she's a provider, she is sort of a mayor of nowhere, a leader in all those respects. She has been an Avenger for 5 years with Rocket, a guardian of the galaxy. I mean, what has Nebula not done in the MCU? And so I truly hope Karen Gillan comes back. I want to see more of her. I want to see her do even more. And so that if they can figure out a way to, you know, sort of do the adventures on Nowhere or the adventures somewhere else, you know, obviously with the absence of a few of these other characters, I would totally be here for it because she's really killing it every single time that she steps up to the plate with this particular role. Let's move on to talk about Groot, played and voiced by Vin Diesel. Again, an original Guardian of the Galaxy. This is technically a different Groot, as we know. The original Groot died in the first movie. and became Baby Groot, still voiced by Vin Diesel, but just a new Groot, a new Baby Groot that has grown up and has certainly become a much bigger tree than how we saw him at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. Groot here is doing everything that I think we expect him to. He's sort of the muscle, also has a little bit of heart here as well. Very much a reliable resource to the team when they have to do something, when they need somebody to like get on something and do it fast. Groot's always ready to go. Like, this is different than the teenage Groot that I think we saw at the end of 2 going into like some of those other projects like Infinity War and Endgame. Like, that Groot was he was very disconnected. Like, he was in his own world playing video games, didn't really give a fuck about anything until the time called for it, and then ultimately, vanished for 5 years. But now this Groot is a little bit older, a little bit more mature, still likes to have fun, still likes to dance, but is definitely ready to step up to the plate and do the job that's needed to be done. What did you think about, Groot here as a character? Of course, Vin Diesel coming back, saying the same 3 lines over and over, but, taking that to a different level, by the end of the movie. What did you think about all that?
Yeah, man, he still brings it home, even though he has to, again, say I am Groot in different ways. I think a lot of the inflection still is important, man, in the way he says things. But man, I love Groot as a character. I don't know a lot of people who don't love Groot as a character, because again, in that first one, he's so integral, and it's crazy to see, like, once Guardians becomes a family, Baby Groot is like the baby of the family, and it's like, all right, Groot, I need you to press this button. I'm Groot. I'm Groot. I'm Groot. No, that's not the right button. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're really wrestling with a kid. So I love that they kind of use Groot to, I think, just have different situations for them at any given point in time, man. I thought that was, I always think Groot is well done, because he's a tree that says 3 words, right? He's not made to like have these crazy character arcs like everyone else, but he is made to be, like you said, the muscle of the group, the family's, like, I don't know, just he's the family tree. You know what I mean? And I think we love him for that. And it's funny, every time he's on screen though, he still makes an impact. He's the one that brought flew the ship in. He's the one, we'll talk about the sequence in a second, but the crazy tunnel, he got Rocket jumping on his lip. He's always doing something really cool. Even when they land on Counter Earth, he becomes this big old tree trying to scare everybody away. It's like, oh man, nobody else could have done that but this crazy space tree that they have, man. I really love by the end of it how he's like, he just continues to grow. And I love how they can keep coming up with different iterations of him too. Teenage versus the original Groot, which now in hindsight feels like Gandalf. Like now, like he just feels like this original Groot. Sure, he was like drinking water out of fountains and he wasn't all the way there, but he did feel like a more wise version of Groot. And that kid Groot, teenage Groot, and now you have this like buff, now early 20s feeling, you know what I'm saying? Like he just hit the gym Groot.
He's like a jock.
He's a jock. And I think that's really cool that they can continue to come up with new things for him to do, because it does add just more. It always adds something to the team. Now he's a different kind of Groot than he was before. Teenage Groot couldn't do the big tree thing, you know what I mean, that he does in Counter Earth. He is growing as well, but he's like literal growth. He's actually growing in body and in stature. So yeah, I just think it's really cool to see what he has going on, man. And it's really cool to see King Groot by the end. I thought that was a nice spin on things. But yeah, he'll always be loved. I know a ton of people who they'll never make it past Baby Groot. It is what it is. Just like if Grogu in Star Wars ever grows up, they'll never make it past Baby Grogu. It's never going to happen. So Baby Groot's the same way. But man, I love the different iterations they will continue to give the character, man. And I think by the end of it, when you realize what they're doing with that last "I love you," mind blown. It actually blew my mind. So yeah, I like this character, man.
Really fun stuff. That moment where he grows. I mean, Nebula literally screams out, "Groot, go kaiju!" And that's the response. Go kaiju. He becomes this big monstrous tree, and he's frightening. He got his tongue wagging out of his mouth like a damn dog. Just it's really funny shit. But he also, when he did that, it looked like original Groot. Like when he actually got that big, I was like, wow, he looks a lot like his father right now. And then the other moment that was just super, super cool, before we do talk about the final act in the corridor fight, but when they're on the High Evolutionary ship and it's just him and Quill, there's like a few scenes before that, before they get into the car, Quill gives him his blasters. He's like, you know what to do with these. And Groot just packs them away, hides them. And then they're on the High Evolutionary ship. Quill gives them the word, kill everybody. Groot has like 12 blasters on hella different branches, and then he has Quill's blasters on his back, and then he just pulls them out, and then they go back to back, and they're just shooting up everybody. It was so good. There was even that small moment
good
where he expands his branches to shield Quill at one point, and
Yes.
Quill like ducks down so he can be protected by the branches. It was just so well choreographed. I just visually love what they can do with Groot because he's super powerful and super reliable if you use the best ways. Even when Quill attacks, one of the High Evolutionary's goons, like his second officer, and they fly off the ship, Groot all of a sudden grows wings. It's like a parachute almost in order to guide them safely to the ground. It's like really effective stuff. And I just love how they can utilize all of his strengths and, like you say, be the muscle of the group. Just really, really cool stuff. Before we get to the final few characters, just want to quickly talk about the look of the Guardians, because we finally got their traditional uniforms in this movie, which I thought were beautifully realized. And also their new ship, the Bowie. We talked briefly about it during the holiday special, but we didn't get to see it the way that we got to saw it in this movie. It is phenomenal, the work that they do on this new ship. I think it's obvious that they named it after David Bowie. They had a David Bowie song in the first one, Moon Age Daydream. And so obviously pulling another pop culture reference into this group. But what did you think about the look and feel? Just the fact that we sort of got back to the original design of their outfits with, having those uniforms present throughout a lot of this movie. And then just also the look and the feel and the design of the Bowie, because that was another set that they built. That was a real ship with real interiors, real levels to it. It was really incredible to see.
Yeah, that the look, man, it's just good. It's a good color palette. It definitely, of course, is reminiscent of that Nova Corps that they kind of have roots in now and ties to. I really liked it, man. I thought it looked good. Their costumes are clean. They fit, which is more important than I think a lot of people think it does. It fit. Yeah, it looks good, man. It makes me sad. It's like, damn, are we gonna see Guardians again with their costumes on? You know what I'm saying? It's like it's so short lived, but man, I was at least happy to see it. Boy, the Bowie looks so good. Like, it was another one of those things that was blowing my mind. Even when we left, we were talking. Remember, I was like, this man knows how to render. James Gunn cares about time and rendering in his projects, because the way that ship looks, to be able to direct scale is important to me. And to tell how big it is compared to the Milano, you could tell like the difference in size than it was in the Milano, and the way it spins when they're flying is so crazy to me, man. I'm like, this doesn't look like anything that I've ever seen. Like, this is definitely some new territory they're entering in visual effects, in just really cool ships. To be honest, like, now if somebody randomly asks me what are some of your favorite ships, I'm like, low key, the Bowie from Guardians 3 is crazy. You know what I'm saying? Among, of course, like Millennium Falcon, other big ships, bro. That it's really good looking, man. Of course, I love the name as a tribute to David Bowie, but man, they killed that, man. And they people should be awarded. This movie might have to be in the talks when Oscar season comes around, because they were doing some stuff visual effects wise that I don't think is going to get particularly not necessarily the eyes it deserves, but I don't think we're talking about it enough. I'll say that we need to talk about this more, what they were doing. And the Milano, not the Milano, but the Bowie is definitely, I think, a prime example of like, they were doing some stuff, man. So yeah, I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned at the top, it's just it's a tactile, realistic nature to this that we haven't often seen in recent MCU projects. I mean, I know they've utilized the volume technology a lot more, and the CGI effects and backdrops to sort of create new realities and new worlds, which you have to do because 99% of the shit doesn't exist, right? But just the way that James Gunn brings his sensibilities to create as much as he can realistically and practically before relying on visual effects just speaks to, I think, how this feels differently than other recent projects. Like, this feels miles and miles away from Thor: Love and Thunder. And that's not to discredit the work that goes into that movie. I know that there's a ton of stuff that has to be done, and every single shot just takes so much effort and so many months of prep and work. But I just think it just feels completely different when you come to this, because when you see a ship like the Bowie realized in the way that it is, as you said, the scale of it, it's a massive ship. There's one moment, I think it was after they leave Counter Earth, where they're frantic, and Quill runs from the main pilot seat to the emergency operating room where Rocket is on the table. It's one shot. It's not a cut at all. You just get to see the transition from him going into the main piloting seat through the hallway. He makes a quick left turn through another hallway to end up where Rocket is laying on the bed, and it's just all one shot. It's all one big set, and it's like that's the dimension that makes this movie feel differently than some of these other recent big blockbuster superhero films, where it's like we're living in this, like this is a real place, and I think that stuff is super cool. Even before that, I think when they're going to Counter Earth and Quill is just like listening to Do You Realize by the Flaming Lips, and you see like the blue galactic, sort of space way ahead of him. It was my jaw was like on the floor. I'm like,
crazy.
This is crazy. And we just got to sit there and just enjoy it and absorb it for like a minute. And that was just beautiful to me. I just love seeing stuff like that. And as you said, the uniforms are absolutely incredible. And so that stuff was just really well done. By the way, I forgot to bring this up when we were talking about the Ravagers and the Orgosphere, that whole sequence. One of those Ravagers has the powers of Doctor Strange because he was opening portals.
He was slinging portals. Yeah,
he was slinging portals open, and I was like, "Wait, has this always been a thing? Was this a new development?" I'm sure you noticed that, but it didn't stick out to me until the second time I saw it. The first time, it's like so much happening. They're all on the ship. It's like a pirate sequence, almost them taking over the Bowie. But then the second time we saw it, I was like, "Wait a second." Those are Sorcerer Supreme portals. Those aren't just regular portals. So I'm just wondering, like, is he a Sorcerer Supreme in another universe? Did he go to fucking Cosmortile or whatever it's called on Earth, and Comertage and train? Like, I don't know what's going on there, but I definitely picked that up on the rewatch when we saw it.
Yeah, he comes from another, I think, planet. But I think he can just do that. Like, I don't think he had a sling ring.
That's crazy. Because I was looking for a sling ring and I didn't see one either.
Yeah, I think he is a sorcerer, but I don't think he needs a sling ring. I think he can just open portals like that. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. But he's known as like a master thief, as you can imagine.
Of course.
His name is Krugar is his name. Really, really cool character, man. But yeah, I think he's just a sorcerer, and I think he could just do that shit. And I think when you open a portal, that's just the way it looks, right? Like, it doesn't have to be a sling ring or anything. And I think he doesn't need one. He just does it. So yeah. Crazy.
That's really great visual consistency, and sort of raises a few questions, but it's cool that he could probably just do that. He doesn't need a sling ring specifically. Let's move on and talk about two other primary characters. We could talk about them together because they do spend the majority of the movie together. That Sean Gunn is Kraglin, James Gunn's brother, of course, coming back here, and Maria Bakalova, who voices Cosmo the Space Dog. We first were introduced to Cosmo in the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. Officially, Cosmo is sort of popped up in the background in previous films, but officially as a member of this team, is coming full force now into this movie. And they mostly spend the majority of the film on Nowhere, and they have a nice little exchange with each other, a nice little interaction. Kraglin calls her a bad dog while he's trying to figure out this arrow situation that he was sort of passed down to from Yondu, and she's not having that. We see that has her completely dejected for pretty much the entire movie. Like, I know you don't think I'm a bad dog. Like, take that shit back. Yeah. But what did you think about just Kraglin and Cosmo, their relationship here, and also the fact that like Cosmo is now in the Guardians, in the MCU, and played a pretty pivotal role, especially at the end too, with the telekinetic powers and making sure that everybody was able to safely transport from one ship to another.
Yeah, Kraglin, not so much. I've known that I haven't known much about Kraglin in comics or anything, but Cosmo has always been a big part of, not always, but recently has been a big part of just Guardians, I think, in general, or was a part of the MCU for a while. We even see, I forgot what movie that was, but we see it's not Cosmo per se, I think, but it might have been. But there was a dog in the Collector that the Collector had, right? It might have been Cosmo. I think there are other ones though that that's why I don't know 100% if it's Cosmo, but it could have been, right? Like, that's very much a possibility. So, but I love the relationship they have here, man. I love how realistic, like, I love when you can make something smart, but it continues to have things about their culture or who they are that just can't go away. That's Cosmo. Cosmo literally is a telekinetic dog that was sent into outer space from Russia, but she may be smart, but do not call her a bad dog, man. Like, that makes sense why she'd be so upset about it. She's a dog. Bad dog is the worst thing she probably wants to hear. I could even imagine, maybe even during training with the Soviet Union, that maybe that was a bad thing for her. Maybe that was, somebody called her a bad dog, and that was probably like a whole, thing going on. But I really love the I think the relationship that her and Kraglin have, especially as the newer kind of set of Guardians that we're watching here. One thing that surprised me a little bit, I expected, as animal heavy as this movie was, I was hoping like Cosmo had a little bit of that. I was hoping like her and Rocket had something. Yeah, it never really happened. But I was like, man, she's the other animal. Is anything going to connect here? Or even before they connect the ships, right? They connect nowhere with the whatever the other ship. I was actually thinking that she would end up seeing the rest of the animals somehow with Rocket and help them get him off the ship. That doesn't happen, but that was just my first thought because she is a dog. I was like, oh, she might have a part in this too. So I was a little surprised to see that she didn't get as much animal interaction there. But overall, I like their relationship. I love that they're new Guardians. It all makes sense that they were the two to stand behind. I also love Kraglin Loki has a little story arc on him. And it's really good when you think about it, especially when he's like, when he gets the arrow from Yondu and all of that stuff, man. He learns how to use it, and he even gets the realization that we talked about, how he's like, use your heart. And it's the exact same lesson that Yondu was supposed to trying to instill in Peter Quill, that instills in Kraglin, man. And in some ways, not 100% right, but in some ways, Kraglin probably is one of the closest things to a brother in terms of that, something that Peter Quill would have. So yeah, I really like all those small interactions between Kraglin, Cosmo, and really the rest of the Guardians. I think those are all well done as well. And sure, they get a backseat, but they're the new Guardians. They're not supposed to have like these huge things happening, and I think they did them pretty good justice.
Yeah, and it's nice to just get a quick 3-second appearance of Michael Rooker, coming back as Yondu, to just like be there for that moment when he finally discovers how to use his heart to control the arrow. That continues the streak of Michael Rooker pretty much being in every single James Gunn film. So I like seeing that. And then Cosmo, really effective, I think, by the end of it all. It starts off as a gag, but then it becomes something that is a little bit more fun in nature, because you get to see how powerful Cosmo really can be, and how important Cosmo can be as a character, because we see her utilize those telekinetic powers, to transport all those people. It becomes like a rescue mission. And so that stuff becomes super, super important for Cosmo to just be that one particular character that has power that nobody else really can. And so we get to employ it and utilize it in a different way. And there's also a really good moment too, where Cosmo, as they're being attacked by all of the different minions and the different creations of the High Evolutionary, she takes like two huge pieces of debris and slaps them together, to kill that was it an owl? I don't know what that one creature was.
It was. Like, it looked crazy. Yeah.
There was War Pig, and there was like an owl creature, some bird like creature. But yeah, she absolutely annihilated that one creature. It was good to see, just like get a cool payoff like that, and Kraglin finally embrace her and say like, yeah, good dog. So all good stuff there. We should talk about the final act though. So much stuff happens. I mean, James Gunn is known for his big bombastic final acts. He never does it in a small way. Everything is always, sort of just taken up to another level, and there's a ton of action that occurs. And it starts off really after they are able to revive Rocket and rescue him. They are pretty much now on a rescue mission to go rescue not only Drax, Mantis, and Nebula, but also all of these imprisoned children, and what we soon find out, still imprisoned animals that are a part of the High Evolutionary ship, because the ship was initially a part of Counter Earth, but then it separates when he self-destructs. It's called the Arete. And so now this ship is, his primary base of operations. Again, another incredible just collection of sets that they built for the Arete. But we do see them, sort of go on a rescue mission to get back the rest of the Guardians, and then ultimately the imprisoned children. But I loved how it all started too, because you get to see the High Evolutionary ship, but then you also see Nowhere, which again lends more importance to what Kraglin has to do. They need Nowhere to basically come and be the opposing battleship to escape on, but also to take out the High Evolutionary ship. I love when any movie can sort of employ like military tactics. Like there's that moment when they're deploying the cannons to start to open fire on the High Evolutionary ship, And it just reminds me of like a military movie when you see two ships go against each other, like Crimson Tide or something like that, or even like a pirate movie when two ships are battling. Stuff like that is really, really cool. And then we also see just like the imprisoned children ultimately have to get rescued and transported. Before we get to more specifics, what did you think about just the setup and how, this was sort of constructed as like the final act to get us to the finish line?
It's pretty cool, man. It's I feel like it's again, they be tripping in these writer rooms, bro. Like, I don't even know how you think of that. Like, where do these ideas, come from? It's like, let's put two ships together. I don't know. I just don't know where it comes from, man. But I know it's really cool stuff. And I really I think the lead up to everything, because it's one thing, I think, to write characters, but you also have to write setting. And that's what they're doing in those moments, right? They're writing like, okay, how do we get this thing to happen? How do we get that thing to happen? I thought it was just really well done. I think leading into that final act, man. And it all feels like organic too. Like, none of it really felt forced. It kept feeling like, oh, we have to do this thing. It I don't know. It just always makes sense, I think, in place of what the characters are trying to do or what the characters need to do. And yeah, it makes sense. And I think it's really dope.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it was epic. It was done on an epic scale, just the look of it all. Once you see like the High Evolutionary ship, because it is like they're two ships, but it's a floating head versus like a cube. It's kind of crazy. You wouldn't think that these are like battleships, like that they're used to battle each other, but they are. They absolutely are. Either one. And like the High Evolutionary ship is capable of all sorts of stuff. And then nowhere we actually see sort of the potential unlocked there, because that is the head of a dead celestial, a dead god, essentially turned into headquarters, turned into a community where people live, turned into like part ship. It's actually really, really inventive stuff. And so I love just seeing that whole thing come to life and how epic it felt, how big it felt. And then that leads us to just a absolutely show-stopping action sequence, which happens again sort of in the middle of the final act. The Guardians have reunited, essentially Mantis, Drax, and Nebula. They've rescued themselves. They didn't need rescuing because Mantis was able to communicate with the obelisks. And Quill is trying to leave. He's trying to bounce. He's like, all right, we got everybody. Time to go. We're done here. Let's scram. Rocket, he ain't having it. He's ready to finally end this story between him and the High Evolutionary, bring this whole circumstance and this whole situation between them to an end, because earlier in the film we saw the High Evolutionary was indeed responsible for the death of his friends, which I mean, that motivates any person to want to exact revenge on that individual who's responsible for taking, those really important players off of the chessboard. I mean, we should mention that, how that motivates Rocket to want to finish this fight, how, the High Evolutionary killed Lila and is also responsible. He didn't directly kill Floor and Tease, but he's responsible for it. He's responsible for all the events, and how that just motivates Rocket to, at this particular stage, just want to motivate and finish it and finally do what he needs to do to close this particular painful chapter of his life and bring some sort of resolution to it. What did you think about that choice before we talk about the fight itself? What did you think about that choice from Rocket to sort of just say, like, I've had enough. This guy has been chasing after me all these years. He's responsible for some of the most painful memories that I have. This is the place and the time now to end it.
Yeah, I think the Guardians and everything he's been through has given him an opportunity to, I think, overcome a lot of the things about his past. I really do think it is the tremendous, crazy shit he had to go through with Thanos to be like, man, if I can deal with Thanos, this nigga gotta go. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can't keep living in a world where, one, I'm afraid of you. Two, I regret not doing more at that time to save my friends. You know what I'm saying? Or you could just see so much, I think, hurt within him. And this is a story arc, his personal story arc that has been going literally since his inception. You know what I mean? He's like, it's time to deal with it. Like, he's sick of it. He really is. He's sick of it. And he couldn't allow the High Evolutionary to continue to do that to other people either, especially after you see Counter Earth, you see he see more animals. You know what I mean? It's like, nah, bro, I can't keep allowing you to do this. And as we know, James Gunn is, I don't know, he came to a place where it's like, it may not be the lightest way to go about it either. You know what I mean? Like, I may have to end you and I may be a hero, but man, you got to go. And sometimes it is what it is. So yeah, it's crazy.
Man, it was just incredible. I think that moment, it's such a simple line delivery, like I'm done running, but so much goes into that line. So much
Mm-hmm.
context is added to it when you just see everything that happens. As you said, feeling very responsible for the death of his friends, and it's really important too that we get the sequence of him nearly dying even before that,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of walking to the gates of heaven is what it looks like. And it reminded me of King's Cross from Harry
Oh
Potter
man,
and the Deathly Hallows, and it's like, oh, this really might be the end of it. Like
it
he's just ready
really
to
might be
let
it.
go and
Mm-hmm.
rejoin his friends, like his first family, as you alluded to earlier. And Lila is like, this is not your time yet. You still have more to do. And she says one of the most profound lines of the movie, I think. She tells him, this has been your story all along. You just didn't realize it. And I think
Mm.
that's what opens up and unlocks the idea for Rocket that I have more work to do. I'm going to go finish my story. And I'm also going to finish the story between me and this guy who's responsible partly for my creation, but also for my tragic story that's led me until this moment. And so Rocket being the leader, the de facto leader in that moment, and saying like, no, we're finishing this. And Quill, just subtly shifting his body weight and his body language to go join them with
He
the
was
rest
like,
of
I
the fight.
guess.
It was right. It was a small cue, but it was definitely something I picked up on. I think that just it spoke volumes to where Rocket had grown to and where he had reached this particular place by this point in time. But it's followed by just a fucking phenomenal action set piece to the tunes of No Sleep Till Brooklyn by the Beastie Boys, and it's just a prolonged one shot nonstop action sequence that takes place in a hallway of the High Evolutionary spaceship. And everybody gets an incredible moment to shine. There's so many
Everybody.
really, really cool moments here. It was just one of those things where it's like, yep, I'm glad we got that. I'm glad we got an Avengers-esque shot with the Guardians, because the Avengers have had a few of these types of moments. In Avengers
Mm-hmm.
1, there's a moment like this in the Battle of New York, and the opening of
Yep.
Avengers Age of Ultron, when they're,
Ultron.
trying to
Mm-hmm.
find the Hydra agents. They had that one shot just, transitioning from member to member. We had never really gotten that with the Guardians, but now we got that moment where we can just see them work together as a team, and we can see how truly deadly they are.
Yeah, I also think it was impressive that they were able to include Gamora there. You know what I mean? Like, and it makes it feel. We know this isn't our Gamora, but it's a Gamora, and it's still something about it that's like we still got our moment with an original Guardian. You know
It
what I
feels
mean? Like we
complete,
still got that
all together.
time. Yeah, it still felt complete, man. And I think it really spoke to again what Guardians was, man. It was like just a really cool. Not I don't know if send off is the word, but you could tell James Gunn was like, we got to do one more. You know what I'm saying? Like this is like the real goodbye, like to who the Guardians are and who they were, man. And we get that moment. It's absolutely tremendous. Even the little brown animals involved, whatever the hell that thing is, it just running happily after the Guardians after having that moment, man. I even love again that Gamora was like, well, I'm here. Might as well go fight too. You know what I'm saying? It was a really cool way, I think, to bring everything together. And the result, man, that goddamn corridor scene it's one of the best we've ever gotten. I'm saying it. It is one of the greatest MCU action one-shot set pieces we've ever gotten, from the choreography to the production design to the it was either you all was talking about or some other friends, but I was like, to have the choreography sense, camera sense, to focus on one Guardian, realize they have to be in the place you need them to be at by the end of the first Guardians sequence, and flip the camera to that person. To it's actually a lot of nuts stuff going on in that scene that like I have to, it gets all the flowers for me. It gets all of the, it's just so well done, man. It feels up to date too. You know, sometimes you ever watch a fight scene, you're like, I feel a little outdated. Not this one. This one felt like this might be the future. I'm like, do y'all see this? This is tremendous work being done, man. But I really can't marvel at it enough. I can't. It's just that it was that fire to me. And really, upon second rewatch, I was like, dang, I can't wait to see that scene again. Dang, I can't wait to see it. Because it's also what's sad, it's so fast. And I'd be like, can we just pause the movie and rewind one more time. I think nobody would have a problem with that. I think we'd all be fine, but it's that good of a sequence that it's everything to me, man. It's really like, to me, when I walk into a Marvel film, of course we're here for story and characters, but give me action set pieces that mean something. That's why in the end game is so cool. It's an action set piece that means something. And that corridor scene, man, the hallway fight is a set piece that means something, not only because of the story as well, of course, right, but because of the technological shit that was going on in there. I just wanted to see a really good fucking fight, and that's what they gave me. And so I loved every bit of it, man.
It's the perfect combination of elements. It's the technical achievement, it's the music, the Beastie Boys in the background, it's the perfect and seamless transitions. The transitions in this scene from Guardians to Guardian member were as flawless as fucking Beyonce's last album. Like they were the best transitions that you could have ever placed throughout a sequence. And so all that stuff was just so well done. You see Rocket elevated throughout the sky. He's crawling across Groot's limbs and jumps up, and you get him really joyous, shooting people and killing people. You mentioned the little pet who's running so just like cheerfully right after Drax throws a knife at a guy's knee, and he's hanging off the side of the wall, and the pet just runs across just laughing. And it's just like, what the fuck is going on right now? And there's even the part where Nebula gets her neck broken, as we typically see.
Oh my God.
She gets damn near dismembered, and her neck is hanging behind her head. And she's still able to blast another motherfucker away, snap her neck back into place, and then perfectly like get back into formation. It was just like, yo, this is crazy. This is just like, I just don't know how they even conceived this. I don't know who thought of this stuff, and I don't know how they really pulled this off. I can't wait to see the behind the scenes stuff, because it was just masterfully done, just really, really well done stuff. The rest of the final act, there's a lot of other important developments. One of them being Rocket again confronting sort of his fate, and he, as he's rescuing the rest of the imprisoned children, escorting them over to the Nowhere ship, he sees the baby raccoons that are in sort of the cages that he was born in, essentially. And he goes to see them, and we see him discover he is indeed a raccoon, which we knew all along. But as you said, I mean, we become so accustomed to him, sort of just like not wanting to claim that you almost sort of buy into the idea that he might just be something else entirely. But we see that the species he is indeed a part of is raccoon. And we see him embrace it. We see him finally sort of own that name when he confronts the High Evolutionary, and he says the name is Rocket Raccoon, and all of a sudden the Guardians just start whooping his ass, taking him out. It's just really, really great payoff to everything that we saw up until that point. And that really concludes, sort of Rocket's story, at least for the time being, and where everything we saw at the top of the movie ultimately, and how it brought him to this particular place to not only, again, take out the High Evolutionary and finally confront that, not kill him, but, just really just deal with them in essence, but also rescue the rest of those raccoons and the rest of those animals so that they don't have to experience what he dealt with growing up. What did you think about just how they illustrated that whole sequence?
Man, I actually got chills in the middle of the theater when he said Rocket Raccoon. That's one of the moments like the theater stands and claps and everyone goes nuts, because it's such a come to like bring everything home moment that was earned. We say that word a lot here. They earned that moment, man. And for us to spend all this time with Rocket, and he constantly has told us he wasn't a raccoon, and the fact that this movie is about like owning who you are, you know what I mean? And then he finally finds out he really is a raccoon, and he doesn't really like bat an eye at it either, because it was like, it was bigger than that. Like, he was on that ship in some ways to resolve things, right? It wasn't only to resolve the High Evolutionary and revenge. It was like, this is where I grew up. I grew up in these cages. And for him to just say Rocket Raccoon, bro, it was everything again. Because Guardians in its infancy, even before Guardians came out, I knew exactly who Rocket Raccoon was. Like, he was pretty big in comics at the time. Like, he had become part of teams and Avengers. I knew him as a master technician, as a really good tactile person. I was like, they're not calling this dude Rocket Raccoon. And so low key, it was like almost 10 years of work for him to say Rocket Raccoon. And then all the Guardians whoop his ass. Yes. Just yes, like across the board, yes. Like, and it was almost like it was like the dessert of the hallway scene. Cause even that part was crazy. The way they whipped his ass one by one, everybody got their little moment, but it's like they rallied for Rocket because it was still his moment, but the other Guardians were there supporting him. That's exactly what this movie is or was, right? It was just really good, man. And to see everything with it was just good. That's
just beautifully done. I think that, you talk about moments that are super emotional in this movie, which many of them pretty much lie with Rocket in what we saw, whether it's his conception, him being born and being experimented on, to the relationship with his friends like Lila, to their death, to this particular moment, and seeing that this guy is owning his identity and embracing who he is, because this is a movie about that. And it's also a movie about compassion too. And the fact that he has enough compassion to say, we need to rescue the rest of these creatures too. Like, we're not done here, because I already know what lies ahead for them if they were to stay here, because I'm not going to kill High Evolutionary. I'm a guardian of the galaxy. I don't have to do that.
right.
But he could still resurface. He could still continue his work if he is able to recuperate and rebuild his empire. And so we're not going to give him that chance. We are going to rescue every last creature and animal that's locked up here. And that's the punctuation mark on all this stuff. Like, it's not just the kids, it's not just the living beings, the humanoids, so to say. It's these other living creatures as well. And so all that stuff was absolutely extraordinary. Just the perfect moment to wrap up that particular piece of the story. And we got to see how much Rocket actually fucked up the High Evolutionary's face, which he disfigured and dismembered the shit out of him. I mean, after High Evolutionary killed all of Rocket's friends, we saw Rocket just scratch up his shit like a damn key to a car. But now we saw the real effects of it. The fact that this entire movie, he's been wearing a mask, and it looked like a mask, but it also looked like it was still his face, but maybe just like
crazy.
Maybe just the outer edges have been stapled on. I don't think anybody really realized that it's the whole thing is a mask. His whole face is just like gone, and that reveal was quite frightening. It's one of the more graphic images in any MCU movie. What did you think about seeing that, in that final reveal?
It was really crazy looking. That's there's a lot of things about this. I was like, man, James Gunn might have also just broke another barrier low key while doing something, because that was really graphic. And even throughout the movie, just thinking about blood, it wasn't, of course, like the R-rated red, but nor was it Morbius black. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was like a that's a crazy,
what a fucking
crazy
cop
scale.
Out. Yeah,
that's the scale now. But it was dark. It was light enough to tell it was blood, but it didn't break any rules. But it still made you feel it though. And so even when you see his face get pulled off, you're like, oh no, this dude is like he has to be constantly in pain. Yeah. At least to some form of fashion, right? Like, you don't have a real face. Even kind of sidetrack more than that, what made Gamora be like, I want to see this? Like, she was the one that pulled it off. She was like,
she's sick, bro. She's fucking twisted.
She is sick.
She saw that staple and was like, oh, what's behind here? Let me pull and see.
She literally tilted her head and was like, what is
it's some true Michael Myers shit, It's like
she's crazy.
Like a serial killer.
No, she's really insane. But man, I thought it was a crazy moment though, because it really is like, as much as this movie is about owning who you are, it's almost like some crazy metaphor, right? To where he was wearing a mask for who he really was the whole time as he experienced. It's crazy, man, how many layers you can really go into with some of this stuff. But wow, what a wild moment to see his face, man, and how violent it looks. It's crazy.
Yeah, I thought Two-Face in The Dark Knight looked bad. No, High Evolutionary got it a lot worse, because not only was his face just gone, I mean, you can see like the visible deterioration of his skin too. Like, the tissue was like starting to, his mouth wasn't even fully formed at this point anymore. Like, Rocket really, man, he fucked him up pretty bad. Yeah, he jacked him up. So it was good to see that moment, sort of come to life and see, the High Evolutionary, he got what was coming to him at the end of the day. And then followed by that, they finally do escape his ship as it's exploding. Almost all the Guardians make it to safety except Quill. Quill is like the last guy left behind to get off of the ship. And I think we all sit there and we're watching the movie unfold, and it's like, oh, it's Quill. He's the leader, very Indiana Jones-esque type character who can get out of any sticky situation. He can find his way and maneuver out of it in a really clever way. And then it looks like he won't escape. He's not able to use enough propulsion from the device that he's using to catapult him over to the other ship in order to make it safely. And he's in the middle of space. There is no air or gravity out there. Like, he's in the middle of it, and he gets stopped by some debris, some floating debris. And again, another very striking, disturbing visual. We see him start to freeze up, and we see his face start to bloat and swell up. And it's like, yo, he's about to meet his end. Like, they're really about to kill Quill just like that, just so suddenly. And thankfully we see that that's not the case. He's rescued by Adam Warlock, but it was really shocking because, again, I think we all expect somebody's going to die. And it was quite shocking to see, like, well, did they really just hold it until like the last possible moment? Like, he doesn't get shot. He doesn't get beat up. Like, he just dies by fucking circumstance of being the last guy off the ship. How were you feeling just in that moment? Like, did it seem like it was truly the end for him, or did you still have like some sense of hope? Like, oh, okay, he'll probably still make it out alive.
I think there was like a realization in the middle of it. When it first starts happening, I was like, no way they kill this dude. Like that, and I mean that in like the way that I thought they really might kill this dude for a second. Cause I don't know. There's just something about it where you're like, okay, Rocket is okay. He's not dying in this movie anymore. Is somebody else going to die? And then this starts to happen. And you're like, whoa. Talk about stakes. Star-Lord dying is pretty big. But I had a realization in the middle of all of it is that he went back to get the Zune. I was like, they're not going to kill this man off because he went to go get a Zune. That was like my realization. I was like, nah, that's not how he goes out. It
can't be for that.
That's just not the way he goes out, man. I could go on a whole soapbox about Zune because I used to have one. And I really actually loved my Zune. And people talk shit, but I was like, I got 30 gigs of music. I don't know what the hell you got, but this is my shit. I really love my Zune. Like, it was the shit. I was like, they're not going to kill this dude over the Zune. So I did have a realization, and it was all good after that.
Yeah, and then you get Warlock rescuing him, which they basically replicated the famous Michelangelo painting, where the two fingers are about to touch, and he brings him to safety. So it was nice to see that, again, Warlock finds a new purpose. He's finding a second chance, and I think that moment doesn't happen if you don't get what Groot says to him earlier, where Drax translates like, yeah, he said, everybody deserves a second chance, because Warlock was working for the enemy for most of it, and then he decides, okay, I can save these people. I can do something to help out. And so it was nice to get that wrap up. Were you going to say something else about that particular moment?
I had a realization that the name of that painting is The Creation of Adam.
Oh, I didn't even realize that myself. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, so that there you go. Adam Warlock. Full circle moment. Because it would, I noticed it when I saw it. I didn't realize the name, but I was like, that's definitely that Michelangelo painting that we always like.
No, I seen it too, reference. And I was like, I just put it together just now as we're talking about this. That shit is called The Creation of Adam.
There you go.
Makes so much sense.
Yeah, for sure. And so that leads us to the final moments of this movie, where we see the Guardians of the Galaxy as we know them all part ways. We've been alluding to it all throughout the pod, but we see everybody go their separate directions. Quill decides that he's going to go back to Earth and rejoin his grandfather, and to stop, quote unquote, running. He's going to, really learn how to swim, as Mantis put it to him earlier. Mantis has decided that she needs to figure out what she wants out of her own life, and so she's going to go off on a separate adventure somewhere and figure out what she wants. Drax is going to stay behind with Nebula and Kraglin to be the protectors of Nowhere and to raise these new children, these new citizens of Nowhere, to make sure that it's safe. And then Rocket has become the new captain, effectively, of the Guardians of the Galaxy team. However, they're going to be sort of iterated upon in the future. We get a tease of that in the mid-credits, but Rocket is going to be the leader of the team for the foreseeable future. And then, of course, Gamora rejoins the Ravagers. She has found her new family, and they actively embrace her. And so she clearly loves that newfound family, and so she rejoins them. Did all of these diverging paths make sense to you? By the end of this, I think we got all of these things that were set up either in this story or might have been set up in previous movies and stories. But by this end point where we see them all go their separate ways, did it make sense, for where everybody ended up? And was it a satisfying way to wrap up all those stories for you?
I think so, for the most part. Beyond the characters I think we already talked about, specifically in Mantis, who feels like I just need more of her in general. And the way she just walks off is like, this is kind of floaty. Like, you're kind of just in the air. Everybody's like doing something, but you're like, I have to go find myself. And nobody really knows what that means for Mantis per se, versus Peter Quill is very much going to see his grandfather. You know what I mean? Everybody felt like Rocket's going to lead the Guardians, and all the other Guardians are kind of going to be part of that. Nebula's working on Nowhere. They all came together to me for the most part. Again, the only one that's really in the air is Mantis, but I think everybody else made sense and came to a pretty satisfying conclusion for me across the board, man. Only thing that I just want like a short or something with the new Guardians. You know what I'm saying? That's like the only thing that I would like to see, but I think overall it all made sense.
Yeah, and I think I really liked it. I do really liked where everybody ended up. I think Mantis that leaves the opportunity open for future stories,
Exactly.
what she can do. Quill specifically going back to Earth. I love the idea. I will say though that I felt like when we talk about things being earned or not earned, that one didn't feel as earned as I wanted it to, only because like we haven't seen his grandfather since the first movie, like the opening moments of the first movie. He's never talked about his grandpa in any of these. He's talked about Earth and revisiting Earth or not revisiting Earth, but specifically like going to rejoin the only family that he had left, at least from the Earth side of things. He's never mentioned him in any of these movies until now. And so I think it's one of those things where it's like, well, we have to figure out a way to wrap this up and bring it full circle. So like, let's put that back in there. It's a nice callback to the first movie, but I do think that a little bit more build up to that across a few other projects could have helped out with just the payoff of that moment.
I think that's one of those things where they were like, this is for the future. You know, I don't think it was for in service of Star-Lord. I think knowing what's coming with the Avengers movies, they said, how do we get Star-Lord back to Earth?
Yeah,
and they were like, okay, this is the way to do it. And I agree completely for what you're saying, you know, but I was like, I see what you guys are doing. Like as soon as whatever starts to happen, incursions, whatever it is, there's a makeshift Avenger on Earth in Star-Lord who's in the middle of Missouri right now. You know what I'm saying? I was like, I see what's happening here. This is one of those. We talk about how I think isolated this movie is and how that makes it for the better. They didn't have to care about any of that. I think that's part of the reason this felt so weird. It was one of those things that wasn't like that. They were like, yep, this is in service of something else. At least that's the impression I got. I was like, wait a second, this dude is on Earth. That feels a little too intentional. So that's kind of how I looked at it.
Yeah, and I don't know if I love that. You know, if it is in service of that larger, I don't
agree.
know. I don't know if that makes sense. You know, that would be, if that is indeed true, if that is indeed the case, like maybe Kevin Feige and the rest of the producers read the script and they were like, we need Star-Lord back on Earth. How can you figure this out, James Gunn?
Make it happen.
Yeah, make it happen. I wouldn't appreciate that, but this is, you know, in all honesty, this might have just been the best possible way to do it, to figure out a way to, you know, sort of makeshift and navigate his way back to it. But I hadn't considered that. That could definitely be, you know, sort of a reasonable way to get him to the next chapter, as we, I guess, assume he will be a part of, at least at this particular stage. We should also mention too that Groot, as they are parting ways, utters words other than "I am Groot." Now, riddle me this. Tell me if you're on the same train of thought. In that particular moment, because I don't know if they've confirmed this or not, and so it still might be speculation, but in that particular moment, are you of the mind that Groot actively spoke English words, or are you of the mind that we as an audience can finally understand what Groot is saying? He said, I am Groot in that moment. They heard I am Groot, but we now as an audience, very much similar to what Gamora had to go throughout this movie, because right before that, she had the moment with him where she understood him. She was like, yeah, it's nice to work with you too. Do you think that that's what we're to take away as an audience, that we can finally understand the words that he's saying?
Absolutely. It's definitely that. And I actually think it might have got confirmed by James Gunn, but I have to look up on that. But yeah, that's got to be it. He's literally a character and his species only knows those words. We know he can literally say nothing else. So I think it was another one of those bow moments that James Gunn just came up with, man. And he was like, we spent too much time with Groot not to understand him. If new Gamora can understand him and we can't, you know what I mean? And I think that was the moment for him to put one more bow in it on that. I love you guys. Especially, I don't know. I feel like Groot likes to have like family moments, the same way that he did I Am Groot at the end of the first one. And I think this was another like, okay, he got to give one more family moment to him. And that was the I love you guys. So yeah, I definitely think we just spent so much time with him that we too understand Groot. And again, I think that's confirmed by James Gunn, but have to check that out.
Yeah, I mean, even in the first one, he says we are Groot, so that is a deviation
Exactly.
from the I am Groot. And so it could just
Mhm.
be another nice callback to, again, sort of reinform and sort of reintroduce the idea that, like, yeah, we understand him now because we've been around him for such a long time. And that wraps up the movie. That takes us to the stingers. We got two of them. There was a mid credits and a post credits. The mid credits gives us a look at possibly what a new Guardians of the Galaxy team could look like, led by Rocket, in fact, and it consists of Groot, Cosmo, Kraglin, Warlock, Phyla, and Blurp. And so,
Mhm.
one of them is one of the rescued children that was imprisoned. Again, Warlock sort of changing his tune and changing the guard and joining up with the Guardians here. Groot obviously has just grown to such a ridiculous size at this point. I mean, trees are literally thousands of years old, so who knows how big Groot can get. Cosmo and Kraglin, of course, make a lot of sense, and again, Rocket being the leader here. How is this, seeing this new team, sort of take shape and take formation? Do you think that this is, sort of a signal to what the future team could look like? Will it change a lot? Will this even stick? Is it just like a nice sort of allusion to the idea that the Guardians will continue in some shape, form, or fashion? They just won't look the
Mhm.
way that they've looked over the past 10 years. What did you take away from this particular scene?
Yeah, man. I think this is literally an indication that there will always be Guardians of the Galaxy, and they've established the original team have established something past themselves, and I think that's really what they're going for here. And what's crazy, the new Guardians are OP, by the way. Like Adam Warlock by himself is kind of already ridiculous. Groot has become King Groot. He has the crown on his head. Well, at least part of it. I think he's King Groot. Don't quote me on that yet. Nobody knows yet per se. I think he's King Groot, who's just again OP. And then they then came out here and introduced Phyla Bell to us. Phyla, mother, I when I seen it, I was like, who is this little girl? And I seen a little eye twinkle. I said, no, they didn't. No, they did not. And it is Phyla Vale. For those who don't know, Phyla Vale is a weird offspring of Marvel, the original / Captain Marvel, but his name was Marvel. Another being who is low-key related to Thanos made a version of Marvel that she liked so much and named it Phyla Vale. There's a lot going on. I know it's a very comic-y thing, but they decided to include her. What I don't like about that, it felt Young Avengery. And I am
Mm-hmm.
sick of them introducing these goddamn Young Avengers
Yeah, that
and
got to
not doing
stop
anything about
ASAP.
them.
Mm-hmm.
Because come on, bro. Like either announce something right now, just go, hey, everybody, a Young Avengers movie, or just stop including them in things. Because that cannot be by accident that this little girl exists there's just no way it's on accident, man. So yeah, if really bittersweet. I love that Phyla Vale is here. They'll probably just call her Phyla because she doesn't seem to have any ties to the Vale part of her at all. They'll probably just call her Violet, but I'm glad they included her. But I think this is a really cool team to see. We probably will, of course, will never get a standalone movie with them, but I absolutely can imagine them appearing in other places. I don't know what that means or what that looks like, but just as much as they say Star-Lord will return, I can't imagine them not including them in like a big galactic fight somewhere, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Oh, the Avengers are in space. The new Guardians are there. You know what I mean? So I think it's still a really cool idea to have Rocket lead his whole team. And yeah, I thought it was cool for the most part, but the Phyla Vale part, I was like, I don't know about this. So yeah.
I mean, even Warlock too. Like there just wasn't enough here with him, and so
Mm-hmm.
we don't want to leave that on this particular note. Like I like the end point, but I need more work to be done with that character, and I want to see more from him
Yeah.
just because of his importance in the comics, which we have already talked about. And so the hope is to see some iteration of this team, whether it's in another movie or them as supporting characters in another project. So we'll have to see how that ultimately comes to fruition. The second stinger, which came in the post credits, by the way, too, I love the credits and how they rolled. I love
So good.
it looks like the back of it was like a combination of the back of like an album cover, but also like a photo album. Like we got all these like retrospective photos of the Guardians history. Like we saw other characters that weren't in this movie, like Ego had a photo there. We saw Yondu pop up. I just love how much work and effort they put into that stuff. Just want to call that out there because it definitely makes you feel nostalgic about the Guardians and everything that they've brought to the MCU. But the post credits, we rejoin Quill on Earth. He's having breakfast with his grandpa. Which I should mention, his grandfather is reading a newspaper. There are two things about this newspaper. One, it's the St. Charles Post. St. Charles, Missouri is like 15 minutes away from where I live. So I looked at that and I was like, wait a second, they just literally called out St. Charles. And I think James
Crazy.
Gunn grew up around the St. Charles area, so that would make a lot of sense. He's from St. Louis for sure, and I do believe he's from the St. Charles area. And the second thing is the newspaper says Kevin Bacon shares all about alien abduction, which we know is a really cool reference to the holiday special. But really the thing that stands out here, because they're not talking about anything, they're talking about mowing the lawn. The final frame of this movie, the final title card that appears, is that the legendary Star-Lord will return. Now, those words to non-comic readers might mean one thing, but this can mean two things technically. One, he will be back in some form or fashion. It looks like Chris Pratt obviously wants more money. Can't blame the guy. He gets paid a lot for these movies, and so yes, he would want to show back up. But secondly, it's the specific utilization of the legendary Star-Lord. That terminology is no accident, because there is a solo comic run called the Legendary Star-Lord, which is not that old, by the way. I think it's actually relatively recent, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, like 2014. So right around the inception of the live action franchise. What do you think this means, man? Is this possibly a new solo film for Star-Lord? Is it just a way to set up the potential inclusion of his character in big crossover films like Avengers, The Kang Dynasty, and Secret Wars? Is this a Disney Plus series? Are there mutant potential connections that it could occur here? Because if you know the Legendary Star-Lord comic run, there's definitely some X-Men connections with certain characters. What do you think that this ultimately means for this character in the MCU moving forward?
I think it can be any of it, to be honest. And I think maybe at the beginning, at his inception, it really is like I think it may be Avengers related in the beginning and maybe blossom into something else. Because I just have a feeling we won't see him for a while, at least anyway, right? But I do feel like there are seeds planted there for him to be part of the Avengers. But if he's the legendary Star-Lord, right, he's going on his solo adventures. Like you said, there's X-Men implications. I forgot who it was. It might have been Kitty.
It was Kitty Pryde.
It was Kitty Pryde, right? I say it might have been another really big character in X-Men, which Kitty Pryde is underrated and will always be underrated. I need y'all to read up on Kitty Pryde, y'all. She might be important. But man, she it's crazy, man. And I think I actually would lose my shit if it's a movie, because they can imply things like that. They can do so much in that world in the comic of Legendary Star-Lord. Again, it's not a long comic run. It's only like 12 issues or something like that. You can read that in a day if you really wanted to. You know what I'm saying? But there are things about the Legendary Star-Lord that I love, that they don't have to decide everything right now. And I think they haven't. You know what I mean? I think they're just like, okay, this is a good direction. Let's leave it here. And I think they'll figure it out later, depending on how other iterations go. But I like the solo stuff, man. I like the Kitty Pryde stuff. If they go with that's all bangers to me if they do stuff like that. But I very much see the potential in the Avengers of it all. We have talked at length about who the hell is this team right now? You know what I'm saying? Star-Lord's on Earth. They might need somebody like him in whatever battle comes next. I also like that, at least as a beginning. You know what I mean? At least as some kind of impetus. So I'm pretty excited to see where they go.
Yeah, I mean, this could all directly tie in the ways that we might expect, just based off of how things played out in the comics. I think we could see two things possibly happen here. One, I would love for it to be a movie. I think that there's so much great potential there, and we can really see Quill and Star-Lord as a character just be firmly established as a solo character, and really go out there and ultimately bring to life the words that we saw him utter at the end of this film. Like, I need to learn how to swim. And I think a part of that is doing things on his own, establishing a better relationship with his family on Earth, and like really wrestling with that. They won't be able to replicate it exactly, because I think the Legendary Star-Lord run, like he has a different father in the comics. It's not Ego, and so they won't be able to necessarily go that route. But there's other ways you can be creative and introduce those, you know, more familial elements. And then secondly, man, if they're bold enough to start to think about X-Men mutants and how that might tie into him specifically, and possibly explore Kitty Pryde. I mean, look, the Gamora stuff was great, but there's a lot that you can do there. They have a whole relationship. Kitty Pryde as a character is just phenomenal, and I have really, really high hopes that the Marvel Studios can do her justice and bring her to life in the right ways in live action. And so if that's a way to like pair them off and establish that relationship, that could be really, really good shit there. And so I'm actually excited about this. I'm really excited. And there's Secret Wars implications too. Like all of that stuff directly
Exactly.
ties into Secret Wars, alluding to what you said
Hmm.
earlier about him being on Earth and that whole existence of that storyline coming into play over the next few years. And so we'll certainly have to see how it all takes shape. But I think exciting stuff nonetheless. The Guardians will certainly live on in some form or fashion, whether it's through Quill as a character or through some of these other supporting characters that we're starting to see. And that does it. That brings us to the end of the movie. We did it. This epic swan song for the Guardians of the Galaxy as we knew it. Before we wrap up here, we of course have to revisit the age-old conversation and rank this movie amongst other MCU projects and really the Guardians franchise as a whole, because that's been an active conversation too. I'll just ask you, man, in your closing thoughts as you start to wrap up here and just sort of reflect on this movie as a whole, talk about, just, your final feelings about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and then just sort of end off with one, where do you rank it in the MCU as a whole, all across all 32 films? And then also, where do you rank this in the Guardians franchise specifically? Because these are three solid banger films. One of them I think we both consider a classic at this point as it
Yeah.
relates to superhero films. And so, MCU rankings, of course, but then also where does it rank in the Guardians franchise for you?
Man, what a tremendous outing for the MCU, man. I think it's been a while, not necessarily since I felt like this, because like you said, No Way Home, Doctor Strange, Shang-Chi, I really like all of those movies, but this movie does something different, and it gets a chance to bring home some characters that we've been accustomed to for a very long time in such a creative way, in a different way that's darker. And it just means, I think, so much to, I think, spend time with these people again, almost a decade, man, and to actually fill out something and say this is a conclusion to a thing, the same way that by the end of Endgame, right, we were like, this feels like an end of something. This is like the first time, I think, particularly within the solo section of movies, that really feels like this is the end of an era that we have come to, man. And I'm just glad that we've been in the care in I think guys of James Gunn, who really has taken this project and these characters and shepherded us throughout the MCU to something like, again, that feels finite, that feels like almost like we did it by the end of it, that you can smile and be like, man, that's an arc, that's a trilogy. Because it's a very hard thing to do, I think, is to have what feels like a complete trilogy apart from everything happening in the MCU and say, man, without all those other movies, I can watch these three movies and they still feel good. They still feel like something I can go back and watch on their own without any outside forces and appreciate and love them for that, man. Not only that, but this movie has technical achievements that I think we're going to have to talk about for time to come. It has one of my favorite needle drops in all of the MCU and reasons, man. I'm going to keep talking about it. But man, I from the actors to really all parties involved, I know they feel as proud of this as much as we do, even though some of them, of course, wanted to go. I know they're looking at this and like, damn, we did that kind of thing. And I'm glad that we can say that as fans too. I think that's a big thing. And yeah, man, I love Guardians of the Galaxy. In case you couldn't tell, again, very, very, it was very early. It meant something to me very early on. I told my story, 2014 movie theater. It was just really different when Guardians first came out. And to say like they finished almost as good as they started is crazy feat, man. But that's where it is for me. And you talk about where it lies in the Guardians franchise. It is better than the second one to me. It just is what it is. But I can't put it as equal or better than the first yet. Give me a little bit of time, and I'm not saying it will ever surpass the first for me, but what's happening in this movie, I think over time will tell a lot. One of the things, of course, when I seen the first Guardians, of course I love the movie, right? But that movie is also as good as it is to me because of the influence that it has on the MCU and a lot of the movies to follow it. I just want to see, as much as I love this movie, will it have some of those same, I guess, early DNA in terms of the way the MCU looks after this? What will change? What we talked about at the top of the show, is this an indicator that the MCU could have a turnaround? I want to see a lot of those things come to fruition before I put it equal or better to that first one, man, because the first one really is that perfect to me. You know what I mean? It really felt like one of those movies I could hold on to for a long time. This movie has the makings of that for me. And so I still need time, as I think anybody does, but I need time to figure out how this movie will shake up in the grand scheme of things and in the history of the MCU, and really not even just the whole MCU, but give me the overarching look in Phase 5. How will I feel about this movie in the grand scheme of things? Not only that, man, but MCU rankings as a whole, I have a top 10 already. It's in my 10th spot right now as we speak. It could obviously move up, but what I have on top of it right now is No Way Home, and what I actually have under it is Wakanda Forever. So we'll have to see where it ends up. Again, given time, but the fact that it just came out a couple days ago and it's already in my top 10, I think speaks volumes about how I feel about this film, man. So that's where things lie for me right now. I don't feel any shame about it. I'm pretty proud of where things landed for Guardians Volume 3.
Well, I think that this is about as good as anybody could do to wrap up a story that's been taking place over the course of 10 years, which has been through so many different iterations in terms of handing off characters to other filmmakers to carry forth that torch and continue the story, to then reacquiring those same characters and having to pick up that baton to make sure that you were shepherding it in the way that you initially envisioned, to the director being fired and making movies for other studios and being rehired, to the actors having to come to bat. I mean, the process to even get Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 could possibly be considered a miracle, because there was a time and a place where it was a very real reality that James Gunn was not going to direct this movie. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the existence of this movie might not have happened, because there's no guarantee these actors would have agreed to come back if it was under the leadership of a different director. I mean, we can tell how much they love him. And so I'm thankful that they made this thing happen. I'm thankful that Guardians of the Galaxy 3 is a realization, that it's a reality, that we got to go to the movie theater and actually see it, and to get this conclusion, because it's easy to take for granted in filmmaking and in cinema. Things don't always get to go out this way. I mean, there's so many things that just are often left unsaid, so many franchises that never end properly, TV shows that get canceled, or things that just go on too long. It's rare where you get directors and actors and a crew that say, we're going to put our final stamp on this, and we're going to say all that we have to say about this particular era, about this particular franchise. And I do really feel, and only time will tell because I don't know, but I do really feel that this is the punctuation mark. This is sort of the period on a very specific era of the MCU that we just are going to have to come to grips with and say goodbye to. I think that old MCU that we constantly reference, that we constantly bring up and talk about, specifically the Infinity Saga and everything that was achieved there, that's gone. It's in the past. It's over. Mm-hmm. Not only are the films going to be different, not only are the characters are going to be different, but the company and the leadership and the visions and everything that's going to come from behind the scenes is going to be different. And I think Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 just kind of represents potentially a turning point and a sea change for what the MCU is going to look like in the future. Yeah, we'll still get some familiar characters, and yeah, we'll still see some things that remind us of the past. But if there were any franchise, if there were any characters, if there was any story that could kind of properly put that previous era to bed, I'm glad it was Guardians of the Galaxy, because this is my favorite franchise in the MCU. These really are my favorite characters. This represents my favorite films amongst everything that they've done. I've just had such an emotional connection to these characters and to these films. I saw the first Guardians 5 times in theaters when it came out. I had never saw a movie in theaters that many times. That movie brought that out of me. And then the second one did really extraordinary work and grew with me even over time and became better and better and better upon rewatch. And James Gunn has a knack for that. He's one of the few filmmakers that creates movies that I love more every time that I see them again and again and again. And that's the same case here with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Therefore, I think in the Guardians franchise, right now, I would put it as second best. I was initially sort of doubting that, but upon reflection and thinking about it, this is going to be a really, really important film, I think, for future years to come. So it is the second best for me, right behind that first one, because that first one does have classic status. But similar to what you said, that does not mean the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 could not potentially surpass it at some place in time. We will have to see. Time will tell. Within the MCU, right now it's in my 9th spot, so it does crack the top 10. I have it right above Black Panther, actually, and right behind Captain America Civil War. I will not be surprised in a year's time if it surpasses a Captain
Same.
America Civil War, if it
Same.
surpasses Spider-Man No Way Home. I think it definitely has that potential to start to creep up into that top 6 territory, because that joins films like Thor Ragnarok, the 2 Avengers movies, Infinity Saga, Endgame, The Winter Soldier, and of course Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. So it's definitely that good. It's definitely that seminal of a film, especially as it relates to the MCU. So we'll see how time ages and treats this movie over the course of the next few years. Folks, with all of that said, that's all we have for this episode, and that's all we have for this season of Two Black Nerds. Thank you again for tuning into all the episodes that we've put out this year so far. It's been a great and incredible season 8.
We'll all fly away together into the forever and beautiful sky.